Order. Welcome to meeting number 16 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. Pursuant to the order in reference of Tuesday, April 11th, the committee is meeting to discuss the parliamentary duties in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Since we have no witnesses, I'm not going to go through what's required under the motion. However, I will remind everybody today because we do have some subs and they may not have done a virtual committee as of yet, but I'll just give you some of the procedural rules that this committee will take place under, and basically just reminders of how to keep the committee orderly. The interpretation in the video conference is going to work very much like in a regular committee. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor English or French. However, we have found that please choose the language that you are speaking in, and then if you do choose to change language, in the middle of your middle of speaking, then you've got to switch the language preference down at the bottom. It just gives a better sound quality. When you're on floor, you tend to hear the interpreter and the speaker at the same volume, and that's not ideal. Before speaking, please wait until recognized by name. When you are ready to speak, you can click on the microphone to activate your mic. You can also hold down the space bar in order to the mic, and then when you're done speaking, you can just release the space bar and it'll go back on mute. If there's any point of orders that come up during the meeting, just a reminder, unmute your mic, raise your point of order or state point of order. I'll recognize you and you can make your point. After that, if there's any speakers that wish to speak to that point of order, please raise your hand. You can do so by clicking on the participants list and you'll see that there's a raise hand icon that you can click. A few other reminders are speak slowly and clearly for the interpreters. When you're not speaking, make sure your mic is on mute. And of course, like we have said many times, headsets are strongly encouraged. If you don't have the House of Commons provided headset, then please see if your office or somewhere around you, you have some other means of a headset that has a mic. Also, we're going to now turn our attention to the draft report, and I should remind everybody that we did have this conversation last time. This committee meeting is not in camera. It's a public committee meeting, and that is because the PROC, the order that PROC was given by the House of Commons on April 11th requires all committee meetings to be that are virtual to be webcast to the public on Parleview. Today, remember that we have to finish the consideration of the draft report. This is to be submitted on May 15th. Therefore, it would be ideal that we complete this report today. I will let you know that I have, me and the clerk have arranged and all of the party whips for a contingency plan. In case that does not happen, we will not be able to go past our 2 o'clock point today because there's another committee after us that needs the room and the support services. But we have arranged for a slot to be available for us tomorrow from 3 to 6. So that's Wednesday, 3 to 6, if we were to go over time and not be able to adopt the entire report today. Yes, Mr. Richards. I can't hear you. You have to unmute. You haven't unmuted your mic.
I think maybe I did it at the same time as the technician did or something. Anyway, on that point, if we do end up having to go into tomorrow, the sort of deadline that we were that was put on us for dissenting reports was the end of the day.
Tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, if we're to meet from 3 to 6, that will become a little bit difficult because we won't even know what the actual report has in it until on the end of the day. I wonder if in that instance the deadline for the dissenting report could be extended to even noon the following day as to allow us obviously that opportunity to it would be pretty difficult to provide something before the main report is finish being drafted.
Point noted, and maybe we can have this discussion at the end of today's meeting. We can see how far we get, and then we'll consider what could be done in terms of that deadline.
Sure, well, and that's fine. But I mean, it's good, I think, for our clerk to have that information now, because obviously it would be very unreasonable to expect a dissenting report to be provided before the main report is completed if that was to happen. I mean, maybe we'll get done today and then it won't be an issue. I agree, but should it become one, I certainly hope that can be extended, because it would be quite unreasonable, I think, to expect anything else.
Well, we can talk about it at the end of this meeting. I do believe that the requirement was for dissenting and supplementary opinions to be in by end of day tomorrow on the 13th.
Yes, and I agree that was, but obviously when conditions change, then the requirement should change as well.
Yeah. Okay. We'll discuss that at the end of the meeting. My hope is that we're going to get through this, and the quicker we get started, the quicker that becomes a possibility. And then we'll leave a little bit of time at the end to discuss this issue and figure that out so that we have a reasonable alternative. So the draft report now covers all meetings. You should have all gotten the second version of the draft report. Last meeting, we were going through the first version. Some of the changes that have been discussed and all the changes that have been discussed have been incorporated into this report, but we had only gotten up to about page 15 of the last report. The recommendations that have been submitted by all the parties have also been incorporated into this report. You're going to find, as you have probably all read the report, I'm going to go through the report quite quickly, especially the first 15 pages, because we've already been through it. We're really just going through it again to make sure that you're okay with the changes that were made. And then the latter part of the report has all of the recommendations, and you'll see that in the recommendations there's some overlap with different recommendations. A lot of the parties were thinking along the same lines in terms of some of the recommendations, so maybe we can work on figuring out how we can keep some in, take some out, or amalgamate others. That choice is up to you, but so that we can avoid some redundancy in the report. The last thing before we get started is, I think that covers about everything, actually, now that I look at all my notes. So we should get started. I'm going to start with page 1, and perhaps we can first just get through the writing of the whole report, and then we can go back into just the recommendations. And they start really 2/3 into the report, the actual recommendations. So maybe let's just go through the text of the whole report, finalize that, and then we'll get into the recommendations. Is that okay with you, Andre and Justin? Do you think that'll work? Okay. All right. So page 1 of the draft report. Maybe let me open up. It's up to you. There were 2 versions submitted. You can take a look at the version that shows the track changes, or you can take a look at the clean draft version. The track changes will show you exactly where the changes were made. So we can quickly address those changes and get through the 15 pages. So if you do have the track changes report available in front of you, maybe we'll use that for now so that we can quickly just go to those spots and address those issues. Christine, did you have a comment to make?
Oui, est-ce que je peux vous demander, Madame la...
Yes, Madam Chair, could you not refer to the pages, but the sections, so that in French and in English we can follow, and the changes also will be easier to see? Thank you.
Thank you for that reminder. I tried to do that last time, and I almost would have forgotten. Okay. So we will start with the introduction. There was just one change made in the introduction. And so in order to indicate if there are any issues, if you could just raise your hand in the participant section, I'll keep monitoring that to see if there's a raised hand. Otherwise, I'll also try to monitor the screen, and just like we were doing last time, if you could give me a thumbs up and we can keep moving on. You can do it by using the reactions at the bottom of your screen, or you could just physically give me a thumbs up. And either way, I see it and I know that there's agreement. Okay, so introduction looks good. All right. Section 1. Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs, Study on Parliamentary Duties and the COVID-19 Pandemic. There's really changes near the end of it. Everything good with that section? Okay, Mr. Broussard?
Yeah, Madam Chair, we're still in that section. There is there should be a correction on page 2 of that section, line 28. Open discussion about the report's contents. It should be reports apostrophe S as opposed to reports. The reports should be replacing reports with reports. And I'd like to see the following added after reports contents, and especially witnesses evidence.
Page, okay, you're looking at the English version, page
2
of
line 28.
28, sorry. Okay.
Have a frank and open discussion about the report's contents. Reports should have an apostrophe S, Andre, is that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then afterwards, and especially witnesses evidence. So it would read, or should read, confidential draft report during a public meeting adversely affected their ability to have a frank discussion and sorry, the committee expressed deep concern that reviewing a confidential report during a public meeting adversely affected their ability to have a frank and open discussion about the report's contents and especially witnesses evidence. And I think we made that clear in our discussions the other day, and I'm not going to rehash it, but for the members that were here, understand the concerns of not dealing with witness evidence in camera or in confidence, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Everyone's okay with those corrections? Okay. All right, we're going to move on to section 2. Notable other decisions. Yes. Oh, sorry, I see something. Mr. Tucker, Mr. Broussard first.
Sorry. I didn't, as we moved on to the next page, I didn't realize we were in the same section, but in line 2 of page 3, 8 meetings and heard from 38 witnesses, the word of should be removed in that line. And heard from for 38 witnesses, not 38 of witnesses. Yeah. Okay.
Got it. Did you get it, Andre? Okay. There's a couple of other things like that I found throughout the report too. So minor things, keep pointing them out as we go along quickly, and sure. But I think, Andre, you're also probably going to have somebody review this report one final time, so that, will you? If we do miss any of minor editing issues like that?
I'll talk to the people in the PPD. They're the sort of production people, see if they'll do that, but I'll take another look at it. The problem is when you read it so many times, you're kind of blind to your same mistakes. So yeah, sorry about these.
No problem. So we'll point out those things. Ms. Blaney?
Sorry, Madam Chair. Yeah, no, and I just want to make it clear, Andre, I'm not pointing out these as an indictment on your ability. You've done a terrific job. It's just these little things that will help finalize the report. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Of course, we want a polished and well written report with good grammar. Ms. Blaney.
So in section 2, I just have a couple of things I think that should be changed. First of all, the first paragraph at the end of it, it says the House stands suspended, and I believe the House stands adjourned. The other one is in the second paragraph where it says, it's line 20, hopefully that is same in French, or close. A House per week on Tuesday and Thursdays with 90 minutes of questions. We're at 95 minutes of questions.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Blaney. Good to go, Andre? Okay. All right, background.
Madam Chair, sorry,
Yes, Mr. Broussard?
just had my hand raised on section 2.
Oh, on section 2. Okay.
And I'm glad Ms. Blaney pointed that out. That was one of the issues. And I think in a later section of the report, it refers to suspension as well, but we'll get to that when we do. And then the other one I would say is line 19, 15-minute period for questions to cabinet ministers followed by take note debates, as opposed to and take note debates.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody opposed to that change? I guess it clarifies a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everybody's good with section 2? Thumbs up. All right, section A1, the background and overview. Everybody good with that section? Some good challenges posed by COVID-19 to in-person parliamentary sittings. All right, that looks good. Section 3. Section 3 had a change in line 12. Okay, Christy, thank you. Everybody okay with section 3? Health and safety in the workplace?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Broussard?
The line 14, I'd like to just add a sentence, if we can, that reflected Mr. Patrice's May 4th evidence, noting that the same number of staff are also required for virtual sittings. And if you read above, you'll see the rationale for that. The number of individuals employed by the House administration required for normal sittings of the House and sittings with a reduced number of members is 55. So something that reflects his evidence on May 4th, suggesting that the same number of staff are required for virtual sittings. A line to be added there, Andre, if we could. I think it...
Si vous me permettez, Madame la Présidente, je crois que...
If you allow, I think it is noted on page 13, a paragraph was added, but it wasn't all clear, maybe.
I did read it somewhere, and that's why I'm a little... Here
Okay.
it is.
Yeah, it is on page 13.
Yeah,
on my version.
On my version, it's page... Okay, on the clean version, I guess it's page 12. Let me take a look on the edited... Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's page 12, sorry.
I have it on page 12, line 3. Page 12, line 3.
Okay. Yep. No, that's fine. It that's that for the numbers.
And there is a minor corrections there on page 12. I don't know if I should just point it out now or wait until we get there. I'll wait until we get there. Okay, so we're good for section 3. Section B1. Parliamentary privilege. Yes, Ms. Blaney.
On
Go ahead,
paragraph
Ms.
4, I think it's line 4, it says houses right regulate. It should say houses right to regulate.
So are you on section, are you
Maybe
in
I'm in the
parliamentary
wrong
privilege?
place.
Are you in parliamentary privilege?
I'm in parliamentary privilege in
1,
paragraph
2,
4.
4.
And then it's line 4. And at the end of it, it says houses right regulate.
Yes, it should be 2. Yeah. Houses right to regulate. Andre, you see that section? Okay, that's page 7, line 4. All right, so we're good with parliamentary privilege. Parliamentary privilege and the courts. Section 2, parliamentary privilege and the courts. Okay, looks like everyone's good with that one. Mr. Broussard, do you have your hand raised from, I think, the last time, but I just want to check in with you. Yeah, okay. All right, so parliamentary privilege in the courts is good. Quorum in the House of Commons. Section 3, quorum in the House of Commons. Okay, thank you, Mr. Turnbull. All right, thank you, Madam Normandy.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
So
Mr. Broussard.
I'm just, so for section
Thank you, Ms.
3,
Blaney.
page 9, line 11.
Yep.
When it speaks to this approach has been compared to a living tree.
Yeah.
I would like to see if we can add the sentence relating to the content, just to put it in context of what Mr. Dufresne's statement was in his testimony, and that was to a question. Of course, it is possible that a court could disagree with this interpretation. He said in that scenario, the most serious implication of a court not finding a House proceeding to have the mandated quorum via virtual presence would be that what was adopted in the impugned proceeding could be invalidated. So it would just put into context that statement. Now there are other areas. I don't know how Andre could do it, whether he could do it as a quote under that line, or whether he can make that as a footnote. But I'll leave that to him. I just think it's important that there's context to the statement that Mr. Dufresne made with respect to the living tree argument. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. Andre, do you recall the context?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I believe what Mr. Broussard was saying, it kind of captures things accurately, yes.
Okay. All right, so we're good with quorum in the House of Commons. Language rights in Parliament. There were no changes to this section. Well, there was a footnote change, footnote 26. Okay, we're all good with this section then. Section.
Sorry,
Yeah,
on that.
Mr. Duncan. You muted and unmuted yourself many times.
On page 10, just at the end of that, with the language requirements or the language rights, we add something in about on the other hand, increasing the complexity of proceedings may make it more difficult and increase the number of people required. I think that may be alluding to that too, that it's not a set number right now. The more, if it's more complex as we go along, we have more, it's going to require more officials. I think that's important to note as a bit of the stress on interpreters.
Yes, Ms. Blaney.
The other addition that I think is important that isn't in here, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, is there's nothing referring to the right of Indigenous languages to be. So I'm wondering about that, because that is now added and we just haven't mentioned that at all.
Yeah, and PROC did a really long study on Indigenous languages and the use of it in the House. And you're right, while we were hearing testimony, I was thinking quite a lot about that. But Andre?
The comment does appear later on in the report about the language right. Grid made the point. So it does show up later. Would you like it in both places?
Yeah, I think it's appropriate to probably have it under the heading.
I agree. Thank you for that.
Okay. All right. So Canada's seat in Parliament is all good. Section C. Oh, no, there's an issue. Yes, Christine.
Oui, peut-être une suggestion.
Yeah, perhaps a suggestion on our end. We've recommended that there is an assessment made as to where else we could sit, and that recommendation is later on in the report, but maybe actually it should be added in that paragraph following the recommendations of the witnesses.
It's a block recommendation. I Not that I guess it matters as chair, but I did like it. It's a good recommendation.
Elle est à la page 47 dans
In the French version, it's at page 47. It's much further in the report.
And that's for location or something. Hold on. It's because we're not really in the first half of the report, we don't really have any recommendations added in. We're then addressing in the discussion portion of the report all of these issues, and that's where the recommendations come in. Andre, how do you, can you explain a little bit better than probably me how you intended the layout to be? Let me just find that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I think you've explained it the way I have thought about it, or the way it's been laid out, is that the first half of the report deals with sort of information and context and background, and then the second half is discussion and recommendations. It's the committee's report. The recommendations can go anywhere, but the way it's structured currently is that the recommendations come in the second half with the discussion.
Yeah, and that block recommendation is put into the section of alternate locations.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think it's quite appropriate to actually have a recommendation, because otherwise we'll have no recommendations for that section.
En fait, si je me trompe pas, Madame la Présidente, notre recommandation.
Actually, Madam Chair, the recommendation I'm talking about is in order and decorum. I thought it was maybe better to have it in another part of the report as opposed to order and decorum.
You've made a mistake and put it in the wrong spot.
I think it's been put in twice, right? I think, Andre, you put in some recommendations twice. Let me just take a look if it is the same or slightly different. No, it's slightly different. Okay, during the virtual sitting, No, not in my section. In the English version, it's in the correct. It's block recommendation 7, and it's under alternate locations. It's okay. Is it different in the French version?
Non, c'est mon erreur.
No, my mistake, says Ms. Normandin. I was looking at another recommendation. My mistake. Sorry.
All right. Okay, other than that, we're good with Canada's seat of Parliament. Okay, C, procedural considerations of modifying sittings of the House in response to COVID-19.
I have one. So in the first paragraph, and I'm trying to go between both because I actually did my work on the clean one. So forgive me as
I'm going through both too. I looked through the clean one too. It was just nicer to read. So yeah.
Yeah. So, but just it talks about the role, the members' parliamentary duties, and for me, my number one commitment is always to my constituents, and so I just wanted to ask the committee if we could also add to that list. So it's debating, legislating, the business of supply, committee work, and holding the government to account. Just a part that says representing constituents.
Okay. Is everyone okay with that? Of course, whenever I give school presentations on government and the role of a parliamentarian, I always foremost talk about the role to constituents. So I think that's important. Andre, you can add that in? Yep. All right. Okay, D, technological and practical considerations.
Okay.
There was a big change here. So there is, I was just going to point out too, on page 12, line 4 of the English version, the word for needs to be stricken out. That's the second word right after staff. The number of support staff was double then that required. So the word then needs to be added in, and for needs to be taken out, or it could be reworded slightly so that it's okay, Andre? Yeah. Ms. Blaney?
I was going to say the same thing as you, Chair.
Okay, perfect.
Madam Chair, if I could just again on the same point about in that section that's amended about the first virtual sittings and the number of support staff, could we again acknowledge there that if it gets more complex or the complexity of hearings and types of, if it's committees or whatever it may be, it may require additional further. So I think it's important to note that the more we do, the more staff will be required again, just to have that understanding in there.
Is it not in there? I remember reading it that way, that it's going to require more, but okay, so it depends. As it gets easier, there'll be less will be required, but you want it to state that if it gets more in the case it gets more complicated, that more will be required?
Increasing the complexity of it, it's one thing as you get used to it, but again, as we increase the complexity, kind of on the other hand, you're saying the longer we go, the easier it's going to get, but the more complex we get and the more we do, the more that are going to be required. So I just think alluding to both factors that way too would be important.
Yes, Mr. Turnbull.
Just to make a point, a follow-up to Mr. Duncan's point, which I get his sentiments. Just wondering whether this being the more factual portion of the report, whether that was reflected in the testimony that we heard, and maybe if you could point to a specific example of testimony that said it would get more complex. I think intuitively, I would agree it may. It also might get easier as technology is adopted. So I just wonder if we have any testimony on that.
I would just argue, as we discuss, and I think we'll discuss further in the recommendations about voting, for an example, or if committees continue, A, more committees continue, or B, the types of tools we give committee changes, that may require extra people from, if it is voting, if whatever it may be. So I just think from those examples they spoke about, there's more technology that could be adapted, more details committees could be empowered with, but I think is going to make it the meetings more complex. And again, I think it wasn't specifically alluded to, but I think it's kind of obvious if we're getting into voting or we're getting into more committee work at some time or some form, that would make it more difficult or more complex and more hands on deck required.
I would just say, is that an assumption that you have or that maybe some of us have, but is not necessarily factual based? And I just wonder, because I know of lots of technology tools and virtual platforms that actually reduce significantly the number of human staff or support staff in their adoption. So I don't know that what you're saying is true, and I'm not sure that we heard testimony on that. So just push back respectfully and ask you to consider that. Maybe if we had a quote from the Hansard, then that would back up your point.
Okay, so we'll move on from that since we got the thumbs up and it doesn't look like we have testimony to that, right, Andre?
I'm trying to recall some, and I don't offhand.
Yeah, I don't either. But good try, Mr. Duncan. Okay, so yeah. So so E, modified procedures at national legislatures. We're looking at Scotland first. Everyone good with Scotland? We had pretty much gotten through these last time. There's not too many. Well, there was a little bit of change to Scotland, but not overly complex. Changes to standing orders for Scotland. Future plans, C. D, pandemic response. I guess since we're going so fast, just raise your hand in the participants bar if there is an issue, because I'm just going to keep going through them. D, pandemic response plan. Okay. And now we are on to the United Kingdom. I think this is, it was just after the United Kingdom that we had, oh, and Wales, where we had ended last time. So United Kingdom, there's no changes to the overview. The hybrid House of Commons, a change at the end of that section. Is everyone okay with that change? Yes, Mr. Broussard?
Sorry, Madam Chair, the page 17, line 9, I think it should be reflective as well that somewhere in there, whether it's at the end of the sentence or even a new paragraph, that a note that the UK's temporary measures were scheduled to expire on May 12th, but that the House was scheduled to debate that day today. And I don't know the results of it because I haven't seen it, but that they were going to debate a renewal to May 20th. And at that point, in May 20th, it's expected that they're to start a 2-week adjournment. So again, I don't know what the result of today's debate was, but I think we should put a note in there just for clarity's sake that was what their intent was.
When you get a chance.
When I get a chance, what?
Yeah, I guess that just goes to keeping the report as updated and current as possible. We're limited with time, but I think this one is probably possible, right, Andre? You can put that update in? Okay.
One other comment that I have, Madam Chair, is regarding this section. I like the way it has been updated at the end of the section with the specific reference to the UK. But I wonder if we could also just include a reference to Member Hub, the Member Hub platform, which has been approved based on single sign-on and multi-factor authentication, which is basically up to a standard for cybersecurity that the UK Parliament was okay with. I think it would be nice to see that referenced in there.
Okay, and where that was in the letter that we had received, or the?
This is the a document that we received on from the Procedure Committee.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's dated May 5th, 2020.
Oh, perfect. Andre, you'll add that addition in? Okay. All right, so we're past the UK now and on to Wales. Well, overview. Okay, everyone's good. Changes to the standing orders. Okay. Thank you. I'll try to get to my two versions at the same time. All right. Challenges. I think we're good for this section. Australia. We're heading into the new part of the report that we hadn't gone over last time. So I'll give everybody a little bit more time, but hopefully we've all done our homework, and it seems like most of you have. We're good with Australia? It's a short section.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Broussard?
I thought we were still on challenges. Okay, so there's a couple of things that I note. Page 19, line 2, just a
for again, Australia, right?
Yep.
Okay. Page 19 is Australia.
And
then New Zealand.
Okay, stand by. Okay, sorry. Yep. It's just we're going quickly here, so
yeah, no problem.
Trying to stay up. Okay, but I will have some stuff on New Zealand. Thank you.
Okay, you have stuff on New Zealand. Okay, Australia is good. All right, Mr. Broussard, New Zealand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a few things to note here. Page 19, line 2, replace be fixed. It should be to be fixed. I don't know if Andre would agree with me on that. just to add a to be fixed by the speakers. Page 19, lines 4 to 7. It should read on March 25th, 2020, the New Zealand House of Representatives announced, because the issue here is that the content of the proxy votes is repeated 2 paragraphs later. So that line 4 to 7 replace with on March 20th, 25th of March 2020, the New Zealand House of Representatives announced. The other change that I would suggest is page 19, line 11, replace that Parliament is suspended until 28 April 2020 with Parliament was adjourned. So replace Parliament is suspended with Parliament was adjourned, and it goes back to what I said, that this came up earlier when the House resumed its usual schedule of 3 sittings per week. And the last one is a question for Andre, page 19, line 22 to page 20, line 2. If the resolution referred to has any prospect of being adopted, is this like going through and randomly picking private members' motion off the order paper? So I'm curious whether
you're jumping into United States there, right?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, let's just stick with New Zealand.
Let's just
sorry
stick
about
with
that.
New Zealand.
Okay.
Andre, did you get the 2 changes to New Zealand? Yep. Okay.
There were 3 actually.
Oh, there were 3. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, Andre's got them.
Okay.
I only followed 3, 2. Mr. Turnbull, did you want to say something? I thought I saw you gesture. Okay. Okay. So we're good with that, and now we're on to the United States. United States, Mr. Broussard.
Yep. So just again, line 22 to page 20, line 2.
Oh. Yes.
Just
Sorry. Apparently.
Oh wait.
Sorry, Mr. Broussard. I was just having a sidebar with the clerk there, and so just a reminder to everybody as well, whenever you intervene, please keep your headset on. Thank you, Mr. Duncan. You didn't have your headset on last time you spoke, and that was a little bit of a problem for the translators. I was going to wait to remind you when you next spoke, but that will be helpful. And I'm actually having some interference in mine today, so hopefully we can get through that. But is everyone hearing a little bit of a background noise today?
Yeah, and I was hearing it on my headset, so I thought it was maybe my headset, but I apologize.
Yeah, okay. Can you just a little test right now? Still hear the background noise, or is it better now? A little bit. You can still hear it, right? Okay. Oh, it doesn't have anything to do with my headset, I guess. I think it's everybody. Because we can still hear it even. Okay, so we'll carry on while they're trying to fix this. We can still hear each other. It's just a little bit, I guess, agitating, but okay. All right, so the United States, Andre, you had gotten the point made there. Any comments on that?
Well, I don't think we really. Sorry, Andre. I don't think we really discussed it. I mentioned it, but then we went back.
Yeah.
I guess the question I would have, in the report, it refers, excuse me, Madam Chair, to a resolution that was introduced in the U.S. Senate to allow members to vote remotely rather than coming to the Senate chamber. I guess my question is to the analyst, to Andre, is. Excuse me. Does this resolution, does it have any prospect of being adopted? Because I'm trying to figure out where that came from, where that reference came from, and whether it in fact has any chance of being adopted, or is it a private member's bill that was put forward? I don't know what context that we got that information from and why it's actually in the report, at least that specific reference.
Madam Chair, I understand Mr. Broussard's question. This section, as well as Australia and New Zealand, was kindly provided to me by a colleague. So I'm not really able to speak too intelligently about where my colleague found this, but I can look into it. And if it turns out that it's not worth putting in the report, I can remove it.
Yeah, and I guess that's really where I'm coming from on this. If it wasn't any evidence that came to the committee, I don't know again in what context this resolution was put in. Is it the equivalent of a private member's bill, for example, that we would see in our parliament that for the most part, unless it's something that's really supported by all sides, doesn't have a chance. And there are issues where the U.S. Senate, for example, can cast their vote remotely. So I don't see the need, Madam Chair, frankly, to have that part of this in there for any other reason.
If it's found to be accurate, and then I don't see, because the committee had, I'm just trying to go over everything we're going through right now with all of the provincial legislatures as well that come right after this. The committee had requested the analyst to do his own research and insert all of these because we hadn't heard from all of these different regions. And so in our last meeting, that was requested of the analyst. And so now I'm a little confused. We've had him do all this work, put it into the report, and we're not going to find that we had any of the witnesses mention any of these other regions other than the ones we heard from.
Right.
But I think Andre can go back to find what the source is, and maybe we can insert that into a footnote, Andre, and make sure that the source is valid and accurate.
And I don't even know whether this resolution that was introduced has any chance of being passed or not, but
no, it might not. It seems
just
like
passing it, and if we're just putting it in passing, then okay, that's fine.
Actually, when I read it, it seems like the United States, other than what the Senate has done, is actually far behind and passing or making any changes in comparison to the other countries. So I think even in reading it, we see that there's not a lot that has been done. And even when we go into the provincial parliaments, not too much has been changed. I think they might be waiting for the federal government maybe to take some steps in order for them to do so. I don't know, but we'll see that it's very standard.
Can I ask one more question of Andre, Madam Chair? Do you know if has the Senate started sitting again in the United States? Do you know if they've started their sessions, or Mr.
Sorry,
Duncan?
I don't know. Sorry, I could probably find that out before the end of this meeting. It shouldn't be too hard to find out.
Okay. Well,
we can Google it.
Sure.
They voted by.
Sorry. Where are we here, Mr. Duncan? Because I don't know, but maybe we can put in the fact in the report that the Senate has started or has not started sitting to consider the adoption of this resolution. I don't know, just a suggestion, Madam Chair.
Okay. Yeah, we can add more information, maybe perhaps to make it make the context even more understandable of where they're at. There may be some new updates. So, Andre, since you're going to update the UK portion, maybe the second portion that you can take a look at is the United States, if they've are any closer to adopting anything or having any sittings of either house. Mr. Duncan, you had a comment? No, okay. All right, so we're through the United States. We're on to British Columbia.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Broussard?
Again, seeking a point of clarification and to keep it updated.
Mm-hmm.
I'll note that lines 17 and 18, that the Assembly, it should be replaced that the Assembly has not resumed sittings and I'll note that on May 6th that the Premier announced the provincial reopening plan, which expressly included regular sittings of the legislature as part of the next phase, expected in mid-May. And again, if the intent, as Mr. Turnbull says, is to keep the report current, I think that that should be reflected on page 20, somewhere around line 17 and 18.
So that that comment may, I mean, I don't know if I should say then, that's maybe a change you may want to make in every section of the provincial. Andre, it seems like you had a very standard way of writing all the provincial sections. Like the last paragraph was regarding voting, the first paragraph was an overview, and the middle was committee meetings or legislatures sitting, right? I don't know why I went all over the place with that. So the middle of the chunk is basically house sittings and committee meetings, and at the end you talked about voting in every single section of the provincial. So Mr. Broussard, what would you like to see, like whether sittings have occurred or not occurred yet, to be reflected in each section?
Well, I think what I'd like to see is a reflection of the more current information that's coming out from the provinces. I know, for example, in my province of Ontario, the legislature is sitting today, and they've announced that they're going to 2 a week. So if we're going to go through what each province is doing, I think it needs to be reflective more of what the current scenario. I mean, it doesn't take much, Madam Chair. It just takes a line to reflect that. And I've gone through a whole list of the latest information. I've actually shared this with Mr. Duncan as well, speaking about in our research on this, I've shared this with Mr. Duncan, just when the legislatures are going to be sitting and what the current plan is. So I think a simple line at the end of
each one,
right,
okay,
would help in the context of where we're at currently in Canada with each of the provincial legislatures and territorial legislatures as well. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Duncan, and then Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would just really like to thank Andre for the tremendous work that has been done, and to recognize that when he was asked to add in this information, it's been done in a consistent manner. And I really appreciate that analysis. I'm concerned when material has been presented in a consistent manner that things that may or may not be liked are being asked to be removed or added. And if we are going to keep it consistent, of course, when we look at opening parliaments, we are very interested in the state of the pandemic in the area, and it's a very different situation across the country, and perhaps that should be acknowledged then. Thank you.
Mr. Turnbull?
Yeah, my points are along the same line as my colleague, Ms. Duncan, who makes some great points that contextual relevance for each province and territory becomes almost I think it's a snowball effect we're experiencing here. Is we've got a briefing. It was consistent at the time. It was asked. It wasn't originally included in the report. I think it was my colleagues from the Conservative Party that asked for those things to be included. We all agreed, and now we're asking to update them. I just want to express some concern around that in terms of consistency and point of time, and then contextual relevance, as Ms. Duncan pointed out, which is really that all of those decisions of provincial legislatures are being made based on the specific context of the pandemic that they're in, and those can look very different across jurisdictions. So I think that's it for now.
Okay, Eric.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Just going to, is my microphone okay?
It's fuzzy. It's fuzzy.
Yeah, there's something wrong with my headset. I apologize, colleagues.
I'm going to unplug if I can. And just, there's something wrong with my microphone.
Speak close to the mic on your computer, though.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll do that and speak slowly. I apologize, colleagues. To Mr. Turnbull and Ms. Duncan, Dr. Duncan's point, I agree about trying to have some consistency. I think the comment that Mr. Broussard and I would agree with is that in the last few days, which I think is important, I agree each province looks at their own situation of the pandemic and what works for them. But I think what's omitted in here are several legislatures are looking and going back in person. A couple of weeks. We've got Manitoba, we've got Quebec, British Columbia. So I think making sure we acknowledge those that are doing that safely in their own decision, I think does show that there are examples of that happening, and with the most updated information. And Andre does have my sympathies. This changes by the hour. I'm sure by the time.
Mr. Duncan, I don't, it's not because what you're saying, I don't want to have to interrupt you, but there's no translation. And so actually everyone cannot hear what you're saying right now. So we're going to suspend just for a few minutes so that the tech team can help us resolve some of these issues. I think for, in your case, Mr. Duncan, you had the headset in and then you removed it. And so the something happened with your system there.
Yeah. They're going to try to call me again here, and I'll try. I apologize. It was that I have it plugged in. It goes really staticky.
No problem. No problem. We'll just suspend for 2 minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Duncan's headset, there seems to be a problem with it. Although it was still better when he had the headset
Ruby, your mic is on.
The scratchiness coming through
it's okay.
the feed. Then when
if we were in the committee room, you'd hear everything. Okay.
That's right.
So it is better when he has it on.
Okay, I have it on here.
It is clear now.
That is much clearer.
Yeah. So is it clear now? I'm not having a feedback issue right now, but it seems to go on and off. So.
Yeah, no, it's much clearer now.
All right. I don't want to jinx it, but we'll try it.
I'll confirm again with the interpreters.
Thank you.
Apparently that's okay.
That's okay.
Madam Chair.
Hello. Yes, we are going to resume the meeting. We'll carry on with Mr. Duncan's remarks. And then who just said, Madam Chair, was that you, Mr. Broussard? Or
no, it was Mr. Tucker. I'm taking
Tucker?
part in the COVID committee. So Garnet Janice is going to be logging on here shortly to chit in for me on this committee. So after I'm done with the other committee, I'll come back and take part again here.
Sure. Can you just stay on while Garnett is logging on, and then once he's all fully logged on, then you can leave?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, we're going to resume with the comments made by Mr. Duncan. If you can repeat some of of your comments so that they can be translated.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be brief, and just respecting what Mr. Turnbull and Dr. Duncan had mentioned, I agree that the situation is evolving on an almost an hourly basis, dealing with all the legislatures. But what I do think is important is having, I just find in there as omitted right now, is the acknowledgement from British Columbia, Manitoba, and Quebec of coming back in some form of a physical presence a couple of days a week. So if we can have something acknowledged where applicable, I think that is important for context as we continue our conversations.
Okay.
Just want to say that I do deeply agree with Dr. Duncan. We need to also reflect what's happening within those provinces around COVID-19. Because some of those decisions are made and for different reasons. And I think measuring the action with the outcome is going to become a long-term part of the responsibility of all parliamentarians.
We seem to have lost
There.
the feed again.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, it's back.
Okay. Okay. Don't know what's happening there. But anyways, I don't know how to proceed really right now with these sections.
Madam Chair?
Mhm.
Yeah. Just to make a point, just further, and I appreciate where everybody's coming from on this, but I don't think we're asking for anything more than to accurately reflect what is happening across the country with respect to provincial legislatures. It's widely reported. It's in the news. Premiers have come out every day, and House leaders within those provinces have come out every day and said that this is what we're doing, and we're doing it for this reason. So to have it reflected in this report, I think accurately reflects on what's happening across the country. After all, that's what we're trying to do here, and to provide Parliament with a report on what's going on. So I don't see any real issue on doing that. Everybody knows that we're in the midst of a global pandemic, and each province is responding differently, as is their right to do. But the fact is that they are responding to opening up their legislatures. So to have a sentence up to date, the report goes to Parliament, is to be tabled on Friday, and to have an up to date report on where the legislatures are at, I don't think that's asking for much, other than the truth, quite frankly, of what's going on and what's reflective across the country. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Duncan and then Mr. Turnbull.
Could I suggest a compromise if we're adding into those points and what Ms. Blaney and the others have mentioned, perhaps at the beginning of section F, before we start listing the details of each province, could we allude a sentence or two on there about the situation is evolving in each province and each legislature, as are the pandemic situations in each province, so the responses are varied. I have no problem acknowledging that it is different in PEI than it is in BC as it is in Quebec. So acknowledging something at the beginning, I don't have a problem with that, to allude to that situation as well.
Okay, we have next Mr. Turnbull, then Dr. Duncan, and then Ms. Blaney.
Appreciate the comments made by my colleagues, Madam Chair, and appreciate Mr. Duncan's attempt at sort of maybe a middle ground or compromise solution. I really feel strongly, I was a CEO of a company for over a decade. We did 350 research reports over that time, so I have some expertise in this area. I would never ask an analyst or researcher that did not do the original research to go and update that information with some simple Google searches just because the client didn't like, particularly the results that were reported. So I think, I'm pushing back strongly against this because I feel like it puts an added burden on the analyst to supplement research that he himself did not do. It doesn't stay true to, I think, the integrity of the research that was done at a single point in time. And I think, just in general, I think it creates additional work. And, I think if we were to do it justice, we'd really have to look at, to Mr. Duncan's point, having a general statement about the context being different isn't quite substantial enough for me to feel confident that the decisions that those provincial legislatures were making is adequately represented in context, because I'd really like to see an overview of what the public health scenario looks like, the numbers of cases, etc., what the trends look like, what the specific risks were for them, what their public health advice was, public health professionals were reporting. So I think what we do here is we risk creating a whole added bunch of work for the analysts to do right at the last minute here before the report is produced. And I think this information is been presented to us quite a substantial number of weeks ago. And if it were the desire of the committee to have it regularly updated right up until the finish line, we should have expressed that in advance, in my opinion. Madam Chair, you're on mute.
Dr. Duncan and then Ms. Blaney, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too am concerned. We asked Andre to go and do this work, and that work has been done in a consistent manner. And now it appears that if someone doesn't like evidence or wants other evidence added in, that is not how things are done. It should be a consistent approach. And while I too appreciate Mr. Duncan's suggestion, unless it's a full public health picture of what those cases look like, what it looks like on the ground, and I'm not sure that we've had any of that testimony at the provincial and territorial level. I think we should stick with the analysis that was done. It was consistent, but if you're going to start cherry picking evidence, and that's what it looks like, I think it's really important that we have that public health information for context, but I would be comfortable staying with what was initially given and what was requested.
Okay, Ms. Blaney?
So I think I need to clarify something first of all. The first thing is I do agree that there should be an addition to the provinces about what their process is to returning to legislature. I think all of those provinces, as far as I can see, that have a plan have developed something that they are presenting. So it isn't up to us as parliamentarians to decide if provincial governments did it in the way that we want it to. I know in BC, the plan deeply involves the public health requirements. We have a whole method of measurement. There's a slow rolling out. There's a lot that's behind that. So I just want to make sure both sides of those are recognized. And I also just want to take this opportunity to respectfully disagree with Mr. Turnbull. The reality is we are trying to do something in a very short of time that is talking about the essence of our democracy. So the fact that we're forced to get this report done in this time, I respect the need for it, but I don't think it helps any of us if we don't recognize how many flaws that will be in our report because we simply don't have the appropriate time to do the work we were tasked with. And that's nothing against the analyst who has been amazing through this. But, you know, I think as we do this, knowing how our provincial and territorial governments are making decisions, that little extra added, I don't think it's too much to ask.
What you have just said, Ms. Blaney, seems like another study. Now it almost seems like we're not just adding in if the parliament has had if the provincial parliament has had a session or two, we're also adding in addition to that, the whole plan that they have gone through.
No, we don't have to add the whole plan. I don't think that's a requirement. I'm saying they have them. Making a reference that says, here's their plan, here's a link to their plan. It just makes, to me, it makes a reflection of that we are a national body, there's provincial and territorial bodies. And as all of us move through this, we're looking at what other countries are doing and what other provinces and territories are doing. So, I mean, it's at the will of the committee. I respect that we don't have a lot of time, but I think there could be some solutions that we could talk about. That's just my perspective.
Okay. I feel we've gotten down a road that is now almost going to have a whole bunch of little mini studies that would be very insightful and would be great. But yeah, let's just hear from Andre. Maybe he can sort this all out for us.
If it helps the committee, during this discussion, I emailed my colleague who wrote this section, and I said, the committee's discussing it right now, would it be possible to add a line along the discussion that the committee's having now? And she wrote back to me and said she's on it. So if that helps the committee.
That absolutely helps the committee. And
Madam Chair, can I just be clear then what she's on? Is it Andre, if you could clarify that for me, that'd be appreciated.
I asked her to add a sentence about when each province is coming back, or if there's anything known about when the provincial or territorial legislature is planning on sitting again, just to every province, and for additional information for Ms. Blaney and for Dr. Duncan, I would put something at the top explaining that there are of course going to be differences across the country about how COVID is affecting people in all the different provinces and legislatures, and so the reader may want to keep that in mind when reading about the provinces and territorial legislatures.
Madam Chair, to be frank, I mean that's precisely what we were asking for, is to reflect the current environment. And you'll have to excuse me. I mean, I thought we were in the process of drafting a report that does reflect the current environment. And, there are things that have been added. For example, we talked about what's happening in the Scottish Parliament. We talked about what's happening. We added the current environment in New Zealand and Scotland and in Wales. So to add what the current environment here is in our own country, frankly, doesn't make any sense why we would not do that when, half hour ago we did that in other countries. So we're not asking, it's not asking for much except to reflect the current environment. And we're in the process of drafting a report. This is what we do. We don't hide, we don't try to keep information away from Canadians. We're trying to put it in the report, and that's what we're reflecting here. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, I did see your hand go up and I saw another one. So yes, Ms. Pettypat-Taylor and then Mr. Genius.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I think it would be also very fair, if we're going to be adding a line with respect to that, though, that we also have to include a line that reflects our current national reality as well when it comes to travel. I think that really needs to be highlighted in the report as well. If we are going to add the reality of what's going on in the provincial setting, so be it. But the public health measures that have been put in place as well also have to reflect, our reality as parliamentarians. Miss Blaney is at one coast and I'm on the other coast here. And my reality in New Brunswick is very different than Madame Blaney's. And we also know that there's many restrictions that provinces have put in place. So my concern is, with all that total picture, it's not that I don't want the information to be available to Canadians, but my concern is that there's parts of this picture that are really going to be missing. So that's my only concern with respect to adding pieces of information. I think we have to have a total picture if we're going to start adding additional pieces to it. Thank you.
Okay, we'll hear from Garnett and then from the analyst.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I think, some of the points I was going to make are maybe a bit moot, just in light of the fact there seems to be an agreement around adding some additional information, and I'll leave it to the regular members to discuss specifics around that. Madam Chair, but just while I have the floor, I wanted to ask you about the process you're using for getting recognition in the committee. Are you using the hand raise function on the right, or are people getting your attention in some other way? Because it seemed like there might be multiple tools being used.
Yeah, thanks for that, Garnett. Generally, in every other meeting other than this one, we have been using either rounds, and so I know who's up next to speak, or we have the hand raised in the participants section. So, but today, since we had been going so quickly, some people had just been catching my eye by waving their hand. So the rules are a little off today, but if I can just maybe get back to maybe putting your hand up in the participant section, as more people want to jump in. So far, it's just been one or two, and it was very easy. But as more people want to jump in, that will make it easier. Mr. Duncan, you'd like to say something?
Just a note that I think everybody could agree on is a small change just while we're on this section. A lighter change I think would be more agreeable. It's just for Andre in the Newfoundland section. It's not the Legislative Assembly. It is the House of Assembly in Newfoundland. So I think we can all probably get a thumbs up to that.
Yeah, thumbs up.
There you go. All right.
Just like that Victoria Museum point that Mr. Broussard made last time. It was a good catch.
Exactly.
But Andre, so I know that you have mentioned travel as well in another part of the report, and that there's quarantine requirements in place in some provinces and not in others. It didn't really get into details. So seeing what everyone's comments are, do you think we would be able to add in, this is how many sittings this legislature has had, these are the restrictions of travel in and out of that place, and these are, if they have a plan in place, we can link, like Ms. Blaney has said, to the provincial plan. Could all of that be done?
The issue, I think, would be one of time. I was in touch with my colleague, and she'll probably finish work, as most people do, around 4 or 5 o'clock, and I said, I'll create a list of things for her to add to that section, and whatever the committee would like to be added. Right now I have update when the provincial and territorial legislatures are sitting. If they are sitting, what's their plan? I can add something about travel restrictions as well. See if she's able to define that and add those to the sections as well. Is there anything else the committee would like?
Okay, is that good then? Can we move on? All right. Okay, now we're going to get into, Christine.
Juste rapidement pour la portion Québec.
Quickly about Quebec, I want to be sure that there's no contradiction, because it says in French, no part of the rules authorize MPs to participate to the sittings at a certain distance. It sounds like it may be illegal to do so. So it should be nothing allows it, nothing forbids it either. It's just how it's written that it changes the meaning.
The provision for it. So you got that, Andre, right? All right, so I'm going to go back just a little bit and just name each province off and just get the thumbs up from everybody and see if there's any other minor mistakes. Mr. Duncan, did you have something? Or was it? Okay. All right, so British Columbia. We're good with that? Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. And I think the point that Christine has made here, Andre, could be applicable to more than just the one section, to say that there's an absence of any rules regarding remote voting or any of that. I think that could all be phrased probably a little bit better than the way it is right now in the negative, where it just says that it's not allowed or something. Yeah. Okay. New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, Nunavut, Northwest Territories, Yukon. Okay. And there, obviously, like we've discussed, there's going to be some additions to all those sections, but now we are on to the discussion part and the more meatier part of our report. Mr. Turnbull.
Just wanted to clarify whether the public health information was also going to be included for each one of those jurisdictions, so if we're going to include and update the other aspects for each jurisdiction, can we make
Correct.
sure to get some public health information in there as well?
Thanks for that clarification, Ryan, and thanks for bringing it up now before we pass on. So I think everything that's been mentioned is a current, up-to-date record of their proceedings, whether they've sat or any rule changes that they've made, any provisions that they have, travel restrictions, and health agency updates. But very briefly, like all in a sentence each, if that's possible.
To Ms. Blaney's point, that it's a really short timeline, so it's almost like we're going to do separate study for each jurisdiction now in the next 24 hours or the next 5 hours. I just want it on the record that I'm concerned about that, the validity of that information. I think it's going to be very challenging to pull that off, and the burden it puts on the analyst. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So we're going to move on into the discussion portion. Observations and recommendations, guiding principles, and we'll start with section A, temporary nature of procedural changes. Any comments? Let me get to my draft version. Yep.
Hi.
The clerk was just reminding me to remind all of you, I'm sure you've seen the letter that we received from the Speaker of the House of Commons. Speaker Rhoda had sent a letter the other day, and just wanting to remind you, have you all had a chance to take a look at that letter? Okay, just thought since the parties had all submitted their recommendations prior to hearing from the Speaker and what he had to say in that letter, just wanted to give you a heads up that you may wish to incorporate some of what he said into the recommendations if you wish, but that is up to you. Okay, Christine?
Yes, I would like an addition to be made in the various points. I think there are negative points regarding the quality of debates. Speaker Rota spoke about the quality of discussions. Maybe that's a way to counterbalance. In fact, he's the only one who can actually assess the before and after. So I think this would achieve some sort of balance in the paragraph.
You would like that added into, not as a recommendation, but into the procedural changes, one of the bullet points.
Exactement.
Okay.
Je réfère au...
Yes, exactly. I'm referring to what Mr. Rota said. As a chair of the special committee, I was impressed by the experience, both from a technological level, but also from the level of the quality of discussions.
That quote by Mr. Rota.
Merci.
That's good, Andre, right? I think. Yeah.
I would only add that I would put the speaker above the other witnesses, as the speaker is a very important figure in our in our House of Commons.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, all right. So seeing as there's no hands raised regarding this section, we'll move on to B. Employ an incremental approach to expanding the House's technological operations.
In paragraph 5, line 17, it just says, he also noted that members needed to continue make. So continue to make, maybe?
He also noted that members needed to continue to make themselves available. Yeah, another 2 needs to be added. Andre's got that. Okay, so that's on page 27, but for the French version, we are on section B still, on the second last paragraph. Oh, no, there's more paragraphs, sorry. Three, four, five, six. Are we good with this section? Can we look at the recommendations now for the section? Okay, so for this section, we've got recommendations from 3 parties. And Audrey, we may need your help a little bit, even more so on some of this, because as you can see, some of these ideas are overlapping each other, and I'm not sure, but maybe, from a writing perspective, you can give us some guidelines or some feedback as to how things can be changed so that they're not overlapping or redundant.
I suppose the easiest thing to say would be if there are, in each recommendation, you could take elements that you like or you don't like, or you could take the whole recommendation, and I could create a blend, or each recommendation could be separate and distinct. It really is up to how the committee would like to proceed, but that would be one possibility.
Yeah, I think keeping them as is an option. I don't think it's the most stylistic option. I think in terms of having our report a little bit more presentable and cohesive, it would be good to blend, but that's just my opinion. I was wondering if the committee has any ideas as to how that could be done or what could be blended, if anything.
Yeah, Madam
But
Chair.
if the parties wish to keep everything completely separate, that's fine too. We could do that. Yes,
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Broussard?
Yeah, I guess, the challenge that I have is when I look at the recommendations as printed now, it really sort of intertwines a fully functioning virtual parliament with an emergency session type parliament. I think it's got to be a little more cohesive, conclusive, whatever you want, where we separate the fact that, under an emergency situation, we want to make sure that, perhaps there is some trigger, some mechanism that and we could use a pandemic as one of those situations. There could be other situations as well. But I'd like to, for lack of a better term, put a wall around, what we identify in the recommendations as moving to a virtual or potential of a hybrid parliament in an emergency situation, as opposed to just simply talking about fully functioning virtual parliament. Separate. I just don't see that in here. We've got to come up with a better. My point is, we've got to come up with something that is much more, understood in any one of these recommendations to reflect what the purpose of this study was. And I go back to what it was, and that is to look at alternatives given the type of situation that we're in right now. So I just little more understanding, Madam Chair, is what I'm saying.
Madam Chair, could I make a comment?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Duncan had been waiting. Mr. Duncan, had your hand been up? Because even before Mr. Broussard spoke, I looked, and was your hand up from before?
And no worries. You got a tough job between the screen and the participant thing there. This is a newbie question, and I apologize. This is my first time going through a study like this as a new member. Are we going to go through each recommendation individually in each section? Because to Mr. Broussard's point, I think there's some higher level here of what direction we're looking at going. I think is going to be important before deciding all these sections and recommendations. So just wondering, as a new member, how we're going to debate or discuss each one? Are we going to discuss by section? Are we going to go through the smaller technical stuff and then go to the recommendations? Just looking for some clarity on my end.
Yeah, let's hear from Mr. Turnbull and Ryan Turnbull, and then maybe we can get into that. And actually, you just reminded me that originally my desire was to get through just the text and then maybe come back to the recommendations. I think that may help us speed things up a little bit, at least for the time being, until we get into the real nitty gritty. And it also gives us a little bit more time to reflect on the recommendations and how we can make them flow more consistently, because at the end of the report, it's not going to be submitted with and correct me if I'm wrong, Andre, it's not going to state, whether this party has made this recommendation or which party has made it. It's just going to say, say that the report recommends these things, right? So it's in, I think, our interests as the committee, as the whole committee, to have a report that looks like is written by the majority of the committee, rather than very disjointed, repetitive recommendations, because the parties are no longer going to be identified in the final report. We're not going to know who recommended that, other than perhaps by the fact if there's a dissenting or supplementary opinions, we'll be able to differentiate from what was in those other additions to the report. But other than that, the main body will only have, the recommendations as the majority of the committee deciding these things.
Unless anybody watches this committee and knows where we all stand on it.
Yeah, right. You're right. It is public, but I mean, for readers down the road of the report that are just looking at that report for information, I think it should be as coherent as possible. So anyways, let's, Ryan, please.
Madam Chair, thank you, and appreciated Mr. Duncan's clarification question, because and I think if we had started on the previous section in the recommendations, which is, I think we skipped into the second section that had recommendations, and the reason, from my perspective, Mr. Broussard's comment comes up, which is to sort of contain this into extraordinary circumstances, and really that's what this committee is studying, is looking at a fully functioning virtual parliament within extraordinary circumstances. And I think if we had started on the previous section, that would have been much more clear as part of, I think, many of the recommendations that were being made by many of the parties. So I just wonder whether, in terms of process, if, as you said, Madam Chair, that we just focused on the content of the sections rather than the recommendations.
No, you're absolutely correct, Ryan.
And then start from the beginning, yeah.
You're absolutely correct. And I didn't even, I think in my head I was focusing on the text, and then all of a sudden the recommendations started standing out to me more than they did in the ones that I had skipped. So that was an error on my part. I think let's carry on. We have had a little bit of discussion on maybe, and everyone's been able to give some thought to how they want to see the recommendations look in the end. But we'll carry on with employ an incremental approach to expanding the House technology operations. Is everybody okay with the text of that section? Yep. Okay, section C. Section C, uphold the rights, immunities, and privileges of the House and its members. Now we're just going to take a look at the text of this section at this point, and then we'll come back to all the recommendations in one chunk.
The second paragraph, witnesses describe the importance of. I just need an of added.
Absolutely. Andre, you got that? That's line 10 on page 29. Perfect. Okay, uphold language rights. D, uphold language rights. Just the text.
Madam Chair?
Yes, yes.
The on page 29, line 23 to page 30, we did hear evidence, and I don't know whether, I guess it would fall into this category, from Miss Kakak's evidence that she was concerned that her privileges would be 100% in jeopardy, and I think it's important because I asked that specific question of her, and I think that would be important to be reflective in the report as we're talking to the privileges and its members. But it is not in this report, and I suggest that it is, Madam Chair, so that the members of Parliament understand that there are concerns out there among at least this individual member of Parliament. Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
I've got Christine, and then Ms. Mark, I'll go to you. Can I continue to request that we have the hands go up in the participant section? It'll just keep the order better. Christine, did you have a comment on the language rights section, or we've kind of backtracked back to the rights immunities section right now and privileges?
Sur l'immunité
On immunity and parliamentary privilege is my comment. I would add that there be an addition, following what Mr. Rota said. I asked a question regarding a possible obstruction of privilege if we increase the amount of sittings in person. Once again, this is a way to counterbalance things because members of the committee might base themselves on that on May 25 when we envisage returning to the House. So having that angle that from Speaker Rota added in would be interesting to me. Would there be an obstruction to privilege if we started sitting in person, because it'd be an obstruction for members who have health issues or from further away?
One is the quote from MP Kakak, and about her feeling that her privileges would whatever, you can find the exact language that she used at that time. And then the other is Mr. Rota saying that, Speaker Rota talking about continuing in-person Parliament and how members' privileges could be impeded in that way as well. So I guess both of those opinions are add good context and add both sides of it. Okay, Mr. Gerritsen.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm okay with Mr. Broussard's point about adding in what Ms. Kakak had indicated, but I asked a follow-up question to that as to whether or not there had actually ever been a ruling on that. So I think it's just important to point out that if we're going to add that in, we should indicate that it was her opinion and that there had never been such a ruling on parliamentary privilege there as it related to her thoughts.
Oh, I think you had asked whether she had raised the point of privilege herself.
Correct.
About, okay.
Yeah, and so I just think it should be pointed out that she had not actually raised that. It was her interpretation of it.
Okay, so I guess there's going to be a big section quoting the interaction back and forth a little bit there. Andre, is that possible? Okay. All right, next we have Ms. Blaney.
So interesting point. I don't know how there could have been a ruling, as we've never run a virtual parliament. So the point is, her concern is there, and you know, now that we're talking about this, I'm just so you all know, going to hopefully move the one recommendation that talks about making sure that every member of Parliament have adequate internet accessibility, because this is something that is a concern, and want to remind you that Mr. DeFrusen and Mr. Bosk, as is written in this, said that there had not ever been a ruling, and so there, if this was becoming an issue of privilege, there would have to be a process that unfolded, and that is the reality, as we are moving into a place where the unknown is the new reality. And how interesting for the speaker to make those kind of rulings.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all living through a time that is going to be go down in history as being very memorable, and especially here on Parliament Hill. So everything we engage in, even this committee, it's historic. Yeah, so I guess both of that, Mr. Gerritsen, do you still want that part included? And then in response that there hasn't been an opportunity to raise that, or
Well, it could be worded in that way. I just think that when we start talking about parliamentary privilege, it's an extremely serious thing, and I think that it just needs to be, I just want it to be clear that it had, and I totally respect Ms. and agree with Ms. Blaney's approach, and indeed we have a very similar recommendation to that as well. I just want to make sure that it's understood that.
Mark, can you put the mic a little bit closer to your mouth?
Yeah, when we talk about parliamentary privilege, we're talking about something that's extremely serious, and I just want to make sure that it's on the record in terms of the fact that this is an opinion. We've had numerous opinions on parliamentary privilege.
I do think that the analyst, Andre's done a good job at reflecting quite a few of those opinions throughout the report, and so this section will become even meatier with these additions as well. Okay, so no good feedback and comments from everybody. I think we can move on from the privileges section. Mr. Gerritsen, Mr. Broussard, your hands were up from previous, correct?
Yeah, I apologize, Madam Chair. I meant to put it down after your interaction with Mr. Gerritsen to correct what was said. That's why I was going to intervene there, but thank you for that.
Okay. All right. Okay, we're now into the language rights section. Yes, Mr. Broussard and Mr. Richards as well.
So just on page 30, lines 24 to 26, about the interpretation of Indigenous languages, I'm just trying to think back, Madam Chair, that I don't believe that there was any evidence before the committee about whether a third language interpretation channel is possible with this type of technical setup. And maybe Andre can clarify that for us, but I just don't recall. And if it's not possible, then perhaps rather than place it in this report, that there's obviously going to be more work that's going to be done subsequent to this report being tabled. I suspect that we may look at getting further in depth on third languages as part of this platform that we're using, and maybe make recommendations later on. I'm not sure, but I just need clarification on that, if you don't mind.
Okay, Ms. Blaney has a point. Maybe we'll take that point now before the clarification.
So it was my understanding, and I apologize if I'm wrong, that this is a one-way interpretation. So it's from the Indigenous language into English and French. I'm just not sure.
Andre?
I'm trying to think. I think the issue would be that you would probably, because I think interpretation of Indigenous languages can create some issues because you have to go between one language to another language. I'm not sure how many channels that would require. Mr. Broussard is right as far as I can recall. I don't remember hearing anyone saying how many channels it would take to translate or to simultaneously interpret an Indigenous language into English and French. It might be something that Justin, the clerk, would be able to ask the House whether or not the capability does exist. I do recall there was another jurisdiction, it was Wales, that brought up that they chose Zoom because it was able to have more than one channel, but we never got into how many channels there were.
I've heard that there's numerous interpretations, numerous languages that can be done on Zoom, but now I can't remember whether that may not have been through testimony before the committee. Maybe it was through just something I was researching on my own before, that they're looking at using Zoom for international meetings as well, where numerous languages are being used. Can't remember whether that was in his introductory remarks or not, though. Huh. Okay. I don't know. I don't know now. I don't remember, but but I don't know. For some reason, I am certain that it's many languages that can be interpreted. I don't know if we'd have the capability of being able to have the people on hand to be able to do it all, but does anyone recall any of that?
I don't know, but
Maybe it was just- yeah.
Madam Chair, perhaps what we can do to move through this, notwithstanding the speaker's view on this, that we provide something in the report, whether it's another paragraph or another section, that in fact, that we didn't hear anything with respect to the capabilities of third languages interpretations using this technical setup, and that perhaps this is something worth exploring in the future. That may satisfy us moving on, because the speaker clearly states his view, but I think we need something to reflect the committee that in our view there was nothing that was presented to us on this type of platform on third language, and that this is worth or worthy of studying in the future to see whether in fact it's possible. That's my suggestion on how we move through this.
Is that a recommendation that you would like to add to the report?
I think I mean, I don't know where it would fit in a recommendation, but what I would suggest is that
it could
we
fit
at least
right under that section, I think, right? You could recommend that in further study, the committee look at third accommodating Indigenous languages on any platform that's used.
Okay, but I think we should preface any recommendation with a statement in a paragraph that suggests that we did not hear of any, whether there is a choice for third language interpretation, and then maybe, we could amend, and I don't know where we could do it, but I'll leave that to Andre, where we could amend the fact that third language interpretation needs to be studied going forward as part of this platform. So I'd like to see a preface in the uphold language rights section, and then from that
a recommendation from that
of a future study on this, and I think that would satisfy us finding out, or that would satisfy the speaker's view on this, which
maybe the recommendation can be worded as, so we put the preface. We preface it with what you've just stated, and then the recommendation state that any further study of virtual parliament include looking into exploring options of more than two languages being used.
And I think that's fair, because we clearly don't have the time during this committee's proceedings to study that at this point, and I think that would be a fair recommendation to make.
Okay, so would you, maybe when we come back to recommendations, you can propose that recommendation into that section, or we can kind of hold a spot for it?
Yeah, and Andre can determine how that looks, but
okay,
I think
perfect.
the preface of the recommendation in this paragraph is critical to put it into context why. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Everyone okay with that? So we can now move on from the languages portion. There are a lot of recommendations for the languages portion, so that would be the additional recommendation, Andre, for the Indigenous languages. And I think in previous recommendations, we have many recommendations have already indicated continuing the study beyond what this report recommends. So now we're on into ensure digital security of proceedings. Oh, sorry, accessibility. Sorry, I missed a section. Ensure accessibility of proceedings. Okay, just put your hand up in the participant section if you have anything to add. Oh, thank you. Christine is good with this section. All right. Next section, ensure, thank you, Ms. Blaney. Ensure digital security of proceedings. Oh, Ms. Blaney, you have your hand up. Was that for accessibility?
No, it's for this one.
Okay, perfect. Digital security of proceedings.
That's right. So in paragraph 4, on this page, it's line 11, so that unless proceedings need to, it should just add a be held, not to held in camera. And then, okay, 5, 6, 7, on the 8th paragraph, it has on line 21 around simultaneous interpretation capabilities, broadcasting capabilities. Just maybe get rid of the first capabilities and then just put and broadcasting. Just a thought.
Andre, that's good? Okay. Anything else for that section? Okay, prioritize the health and safety of members and all individuals. Raise your hand in the participant section if there's any issues. It's a short section, so now we're moving on to legal and procedural matters. First matter being discussed is quorum. Yes, Christine? Quorum?
Oui, puisqu'on a déjà...
Yes, since we already established at the outset that representations were made that quorum could be virtual, it seems to me it was missing here. They only talk about the fact that members have to be physically present. So perhaps we should restore the balance here between different representations that we heard.
Yeah, Andre, I think in testimony, the different law clerks and former speakers had testified that it could be. It's just, I guess it hasn't been done so. So maybe that is what your thinking was in terms of drafting this. Like, should we put in what their opinion of it is? What their opinion of virtual quorum is? And it's stated in, it also comes up in the recommendations as well, though. But I guess just like Mr. Broussard is saying, there should be a preface to that. And I think the recommendation that is listed is also taken directly from something that was quoted from one of the witnesses. Are we good, Andre? Yep. You know this report better than all of us, so I'm surprised how quickly you can keep up with all these thoughts. All right, so we're good for the quorum section. Oh, no, we have a couple of hands up. Sorry, Ms. Blaney and then Mr. Turnbull.
So my only point is on page 40, line 3. There's some very small writing. I can't read it. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's a weird thing on mine. But it's like, it looks like
there's
a line.
Yeah,
it's a line. But if you look closely, it's words. I don't know what it is.
Oh, I think it's just.
So just delete that.
Yeah. Do you see that, Andre, on yours? There's something that showed up on all of ours, I think. Or no, not yours? Okay, some people are nodding no, some people are nodding yes. So I don't know, but we'll have the final version, I'm sure, scrubbed and looking good. Anything else on quorum? I think Mr. Turnbull?
Yeah, I remember the conversation we had in our last meeting about this section on quorum. It was, I think, the analyst, Andre, I think you took the information from there and you moved it up in the report. And I think looking at the edited version, I can see that it's been changed. So that made sense. And I think that's what the committee asked for. But I think the intention was that it was also reflected here so that it wasn't, so maybe it's, it's relevant to be in the report twice, or maybe it's slightly reworded. And I think that's Ms. Normandin's point as well. And I appreciated that. I think it should be there.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we're moving on to the hybrid model for sittings of the House.
Madam Chair, I did have my hand up.
Oh, okay. Yes, you do after Mr. Turnbull. It just came up just now.
Oh,
yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. I thought it was up. Again, going back to the quorum from line 20 to page 40, Andre, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we also heard evidence from Mr. Dufresne and acknowledging that he could also be wrong with respect to quorum, and that the consequences would be that any decision taken by a virtual quorum could or would be invalidated. So I know that there was evidence to that in that regard. So I think we may want to add content, the content to this particular paragraph, just because it does reflect, not an option, but a counter to what Mr. Dufresne did say, or a caveat to what he did say with respect to those consequences. So I think that needs to be in the report as well.
Okay. But so no changes to line 20 because it's actually a recommendation. We'll get back to that later, but you want both views that were stated, or the alternative view that was stated.
Right, Madam Chair. And just to be clear, that would fall under section A of quorum, not necessarily within the recommendations.
Yeah.
Just what Mr. Dufresne's testimony was, Andre. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Sounds good. Hybrid model for sittings of the House.
Oh, sorry, Madam Chair. I think there's other comments.
Sorry, Christine. Yes. And then from then.
Juste pour être certaine, si on parle de...
Well, I just want to be sure if we're talking about all the viewpoints. I had suggested something, but it wasn't added here. Mr. Pelletier mentioned that quorum could be virtual because it's a community, but without that, it's possible through Article 44 to rewrite the standing orders, and that would be constitutional at that point, and probably could not be attacked by the courts. If we want to have a complete picture of the situation, that might be a good place to put it. So that's reference to sections 44 and 49. Andre?
Lacks some of the discussion that we heard and the varying viewpoints, and maybe it looks like the committee wants a lot of that inserted in because it is a very short section. Yes, Andre, you want to say something?
If I may, Madam Chair, just quickly clarify, what ended up happening is I moved a lot of that legal information to the front, and now I've left a big hole behind where it should go in both places, from what I gathered from the committee.
Okay. Thanks, Andre. Thanks for being so accommodating. And Mr. Turnbull.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to Mr. Broussard's point, which is I think that he's referring to a caveat, whereas I think the general sentiments of the testimony that I recall was very clearly in favor of the fact that, in fact, the House governs over its own set of rules and procedures, and that the courts on many occasions consistently employed an approach that is flexible and reflects the realities of modern life, consistent with that living tree interpretation of the Constitution Act. So, and we heard this from multiple very reputable experts, and I'd like that reflected because that seems to be, in my recollection, to be the broad sweeping and expert advice that was provided to this committee. It was not to say that the caveat that somebody made based on a question does not negate the overall dominance of that perception that was expressed by multiple experts on the subject matter.
No, point noted. I think the majority of the experts did lean one way, but we'll have both points reflected, and if you can balance the weight of the evidence as it was stated. Yeah, thanks. Andre gave a thumbs up to that. Okay, so we're moving on from quorum now. I don't see any hands in the participants section, and the next section is the hybrid model for sittings of the House.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Broussard.
It's a minor thing, but it isn't to Mr. Barnhart. As a former lieutenant governor, the term honorable should be before his name. And Andre, just so you know that it doesn't reflect that in other parts of the report, but I believe he is entitled to that style. So thank you. And just while I'm on that, I know that there is another section that speaks about Peter Milliken, and as a member of the Privy Council, it doesn't reflect honorable in front of his name as well, and I think we should reflect that. Thank you.
Okay. No, that is protocol, and all right. Any other issues with this section? Comments? All right. Okay, alternate locations. Everyone's got some thumbs up. Ms. Blaney, you have a comment? And Mr. Richards?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it's normal practice to quote a member of the committee. I'm sure Mr. Broussard really enjoys that, but I'm just wondering. I've never seen that happen before.
We'll hear from our analyst on that.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I put this specific quote into the report because the order of reference had 3 suggested things that the committee look at, and this was one of them. And it was, for lack of a better term, the only testimony that was really given on alternate locations came from Mr. Broussard.
That's fantastic. So I'm just wondering if we could at least have something in there, in that section that really recognizes the reality that this was not something the committee spent a lot of time studying, unfortunately. I think it's important to have that on the record.
Yes, Christine? Oh, sorry, yeah, Mr. Richards hand was up first, and then Christine.
Yeah, on this point, it wasn't something we discussed a lot, and I have no problem with reflecting that. However, there are a number of when we're looking at the comparatives from the provincial legislatures and whatnot, there are a number of places that are at least looking at alternative venues, or so an example is it's being discussed in New Brunswick. There's been some consideration given to it in Prince Edward Island, and the motions adopted in both Manitoba and British Columbia authorized alternative venues. And we could also add a paragraph that notes the possibility that MLAs, they're looking at potentially seating MLAs in galleries in New Brunswick and in Prince Edward Island. So we could add those points in to give some context around the idea of alternate locations and what's being considered in some of the provincial legislatures, so that we can give a bit more discussion to something that we were actually directed to look at. So even though time was very short and we didn't, I guess, get to those things as much as we would have liked, there are ways we can work that into the report as we were directed to do.
Yeah, time was short, and that's why we're kind of headed down this rabbit hole where we've allowed for to inject things into the report that we actually didn't hear because we didn't have time. But so, do you want that added in the location?
I don't think a report is.
No, that's fine. I'm not saying we shouldn't.
Yeah,
should we add it in the alternative location section, or should we be adding it in the provincial section? Because we just went through.
Well, it could be added in both, but I mean, obviously, I think that it should be added here for sure. because a report doesn't require that we only look at the testimony we heard. That we can look at all the evidence that's available to us and the facts that are available to us. And this is one of those facts. And given that we were directed to look at, this is one of the things we were directed to look at. We should actually try our best to include something on it. So I think it should be in this section. If we want to include it in the provincial section as well, in addition to that, that's just fine with me. But certainly we should include it here so that we can provide a little bit of meat to something that we were, given some direction to look at.
Mr. Turnbull.
I just want to express the concerns I have about this being in the report. I don't think it's appropriate. All of us have made recommendations throughout many of the proceedings of this committee, none of which are reflected in this report or quoted, and referenced with our names attached to it. I think that's just inappropriate. I also would say that, I thought that the way committees function was to receive testimony from expert witnesses. Is Mr. Broussard an expert witness on venues in Ottawa for other locations? I don't see how this is actually expert opinion. I think it's one committee member's opinion, and it seems like it's inappropriate. And no disrespect to Mr. Broussard, I appreciate the comments and the suggestion, even though I don't agree that these were good suggestions. I really just don't think that it's appropriate to have this in there, given the fact that we haven't given voice to the many other I think substantial recommendations that other members have made. And if we did so, I think this report would probably go on for hundreds of pages.
Okay, Christine.
Pas que je souhaite vous enlever votre...
Monsieur Brassard, I don't want to withdraw that quotation from you, but if we want to say something about that, we can take Dr. Raymond's quote and put it where Mr. Brassard is before changing the recommendation and sending it elsewhere. She says we should have an audit, and this should go with our recommendations about validating other venues, and we would have an expert's opinion about other venues for meetings of Parliament.
Okay, that was the doctor that we had testify. Andre, could that be added in? I guess that was the only other testimony that we did have for alternate locations. Next up, we have Mr. Broussard and then Mr. Gerritsen. Or Mr. Broussard, I think you've already made your point. I think it's Mr. Gerritsen. Your hands up?
I do.
You put it back up?
Yes, I did, Madam Chair.
Okay.
And yeah, I do. First of all, Andre, correct me if I'm wrong, or Justin, correct me if I'm wrong. Was it not part of the mandate of this committee as part of that motion, or there was some other reference somewhere where we were to look at the possibility of alternate locations other than the House of Commons to hold our meetings? Was that not? So I'm getting a thumbs up from Justin. So in the context of our study, I thought I made first of all, my kids are going to be disappointed if my name is struck from this report, because I told them that I would be in a PROC report for the history of Canada.
Yeah.
But we were obligated to look at alternative locations as part of this study, and so I was simply bringing it up. In fact, Mr. Patrice, and I think that we should reflect this in the report as well, that when Mr. Patrice was asked by me whether we could use the possibility of TD Place, Canadian Tire Centre, or the Shaw Centre as an alternative location, he said that he found that that was a quite interesting, in his quote, quite interesting possibility. So, I think what is in part of this section accurately reflects the discussion that went on, including Ms. Raymond's comments. And I'll suggest, and I may make this point a little bit later when we look at the recommendations, that despite the fact that the Public Health Agency of Canada provides the guidelines and the mandates, and we made it very clear in the line of questioning with Ms. Raymond as well as House administration that we were doing a good job and following those guidelines with respect to the Parliament or the committee sessions that were occurring in the House of Commons, that social distancing was being adhered to, etc. I think it ultimately it's up to the Parliament, with the help of House administration, to figure out whether we would look at these alternative locations. So it may not suit the narrative of not wanting to sit in Parliament, but I think it accurately reflects the mandate that we were given to look at alternative locations. And if it's the will of the committee to not look at these, then that's fine. But the fact that we had this testimony, we had this discussion, needs to be reflected in this report, in addition to Mr. Patrice's comments about it being quite interesting, the concept of looking at an alternative location. So that's all I have to say about that. Any striking of this or any suggestion of striking this as an option out of this report basically whitewashes what was discussed and what we were mandated to look at, and this was one of them as well, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, yes, in the order of reference, we were asked to look at the issue of alternatives. Mr. Gerritsen and then Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I understand that the order of reference has dictated us to have a look at this, and perhaps we failed in that responsibility. We'll let those that read this report be the judge of that. But my concern is that if this is with all due respect to Mr. Broussard, I would say this about anybody, and I've been, I'm fairly new. I've only been around since 2015, but in the 3 standing committees of Parliament that I've never ever been on, we've never accepted a member's comments as testimony, because if that's the case, then I have some questions for Mr. Broussard as a witness, such as, does he think that the costs would be justified, and how much would it cost to do something like this, and does he think that that's a good use of taxpayer dollars? I have questions that I would like to ask if that's going to be the case. If this is a matter of addressing the fact that the order of reference, we missed a spot in that, then I would be more open to the idea of some kind of wording that said something like, other than one instance when it was brought up by a member of the committee, we didn't have any further discussions on it, or something to that effect. But there, like Mr. Turnbull said, there's a number of different comments or recommendations. I made a specific recommendation, as did so many people throughout the meetings, that could just as easily be turned into a 2-sentence paragraph such as this one and added into the report. So, I do share the concerns that have been expressed by other members on the committee, and I don't think that we should be using this particular sentence to illustrate the fact that we've gone down the road of looking at this when it was at best, an ad hoc comment that made it into the report.
I think the analyst, I think Andre tried to do the best job when given this heading and wanting to include something, since there wasn't much to pick from. Unfortunately, that got included, but not unfortunately that it got concluded, but unfortunate that that's all we had, other than what Dr. Raymond said. So, Mr. Turnbull.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Gerritsen. I have numerous objections and questions surrounding alternate locations that we never got to discuss with Mr. Broussard. I agree completely that if that comment were allowed in there, that there should be numerous other comments. We did look at, I think we did talk about the seat of Parliament, and we did talk about constituency offices as serving as alternate locations for members that would be included in virtual Parliament or any virtual proceedings. So there is a sense in which we did look at some alternate location or aspects of that, but I really don't feel like having one member's thoughts and opinions about this really adequately, like it just seems, again, inappropriate. I would ask the clerk for clarification, if possible, on whether this is normally done. I mean, I think testimony, to Mr. Gerritson's point, is done by witnesses that we as a committee all get access to, asking questions, so that the evidence that's reflected in these reports really, reflects the robust conversation that we've been able to have with each one of those witnesses. We did not get a chance to do that with Mr. Broussard. And if he's an expert witness, I'd like to ask for more time to have him come before the committee so we can ask him questions.
There's unfortunately no more time, but I see what you're saying. We have all the three of the Conservatives who wish to speak to this. I feel like we're going in circles and we're going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm hoping we can come to some kind of resolution, and it seems like everyone is going to jump to make sure that Mr. Broussard's children are not disappointed at the end of this. But if it's repeating what you've already said, then at this point, I'd just like to just let you know that please refrain from repeating what's already been said, and then we'll maybe hear from Andre and try to come to some conclusion on this matter. Mr. Genius?
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Gerritson?
I believe that Mr. Turnbull asked a question of the clerk. Will we get to hear the answer to that?
Yeah, can we, Andre, is it customary, was the question, do you want to answer that now, or do you want to hear all the questions?
It appeared as though Justin had something to say, so I will defer to him.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, hello, this is
That's
Justin.
actually probably more appropriate.
To Mr. Turnbull's question, it is ultimately your report. So whatever you want to include in your report, that's perfectly fine. So it's something, the committee needs to ultimately decide if they would like that reference to appear in the report. They can also change it if they want. The committee can also decide to remove it if they want. There's no hard and fast rule per se that would necessarily prevent the type of reference that is currently in the draft report from remaining, if that's what the committee wants. If the consensus of the committee or the decision of the committee is not to have it in, then that is entirely up to the committee to make that determination.
Okay, we have next up Mr. Genius, Mr. Richards, and Mr. Broussard. We're at 117 and have many pages to get through, so we'll have it looks like we're going to be going into another sitting. I obviously want a good product. I'm not trying to say let's, produce a bad product in terms of saving time, but of course, I'm sure nobody wants to sit for another 3 hours going in circles on these issues. So hopefully we can resolve this, Mr. Genius.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's interesting that you spoke about talking for 3 hours before I spoke. I can assure you that I'll be as brief as I normally am. My concern was actually that we didn't have Mr. Broussard's full title before his name. I thought we should have added the Honorable in this section. But in all seriousness, look, I understand the Liberal members don't like having the names of people in reports. Maybe that explains why they didn't want to do a study of the Trudeau report at the Ethics Committee. But I guess the core point.
Come
here
to your point, Garnett.
Yeah, and I know members don't want to have that revisited. So, some members, anyways. But the issue here is there seems to be an implied argument by some members that there's a hierarchy of testimony between testimony given in opening remarks and testimony given in response to questions. Mr. Broussard asked a witness a question, and the witness discussed their view on that question in response to that question. Now, if people have objections to the naming of members, it could just be emphasized that this specific issue was discussed, options were raised, and the perspective given by the witness. I don't think this really turns on the issue of naming a member. That seems, in all seriousness, like a bit of a sideshow. The point is, a question was asked, some discussion was had. Yes, it was during questions and answers, not during opening remarks, but there's no hierarchy of testimony. The fact that was discussed in that context is the right of members to ask questions of witnesses that reflects things they want to hear answered, and those responses constitute part of the testimony. So, I mean, maybe a way forward on this, Madam Chair, is simply to have the analyst come back with kind of a more expansive explanation of what the witness said, the fact that these were the ideas raised, and the witness responded saying yes, that those were ideas that had merit and potential, and if the name would be replaced with "a member raised this," it's fairly common that the things witnesses say in response to questions and the context in which those things are said are raised. So let's not get hung up on a name. I think if the analyst can come back with that kind of more detailed, more expansive explanation of what was asked and what the response was, I hope that will satisfy everyone. Thanks.
Mr. Richards?
So a similar point to Mr. Genis, and I think I maybe have a specific suggestion, however, because I too don't think that, and I'm sorry to disappoint your children, John, but maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense to name a specific member of the committee and what they've said. But I think there was a better way we could introduce this, because there was a witness that was actually asked about this and did make comment on it. So that would satisfy the concerns I heard from, I think, Mr. Turnbull in specific, and I think Mr. Nicholson to some degree as well. That it should be something that we heard from witness and that everyone had an opportunity to question the witness on. And in this case, that is, in fact, what did happen with Michelle, I think it is, Patrice, and I forget his title, but the analyst would have that. So we could just indicate House Administration Official, whatever his actual title is, Michelle Patrice. And so what we would do is we just replace the part in that paragraph that's everything before considering, and we just indicate instead, his title, Michelle Patrice, described as quite interesting, the idea of, and then can carry on with considering, etc. from there. And I think if we do that in conjunction with what I suggested earlier, where we indicate some of the things that have been done in the other provinces, it satisfies, I think, the concerns we were hearing from other members, but still allows us to delve into a topic that we were directed to do, and in a way that is in line with what members have in the previous discussion we just had have indicated they would like to see. So I think it should satisfy everybody.
Okay, I think we're getting somewhere. Mr. Gerritsen, and then Mr. Alghabra, and then hopefully that's it, and we can move on.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I don't need to speak.
Okay, thank you. That's very appreciated. Save us all time. Mr. Alghabra, some compromise a solution you can come up with.
So following these points, I'd like to propose, Madam Chair, that perhaps we could actually explicitly say that the committee did not spend a lot of time examining alternative locations. And in one of the conversations, a member of the committee ask one of the witnesses and quote the witness, and I think we can leave it there.
Is everybody okay with that? I think it takes into consideration what everyone has pretty much said.
Sorry, Madam Chair, just to clarify, is the suggestion then that the suggestions I have made about indicating what we've heard, or not what we've heard, but what we're aware of, and in terms of other provinces, would be left out?
No, that's separate. That was separate. I think this is just the issue as to Mr. Broussard's that second paragraph.
So then, in that case, I would argue that what the suggestion I made satisfies exactly what Mr. Alghabra just suggested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you both have come to somewhat of an agreement there, and that's what we can leave it at. Thank God. Thank you, Andre. You got that? Okay, and then obviously the previous points that Christine and Mr. Richards had also made, and I think that was the main points that were made in the quorum section, unless somebody else wants to remind me if I missed something. Is that what you have, Andre? Yeah, okay. All right, so order and decorum.
Point of order, Madam Chair. I'm just handing the floor over to Corey now, so
thank you.
With all of you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sure you'll miss me.
Nice to have you back, Mr. Tucker.
This is way better than QP.
Way better answers, by the way.
Well, okay, we are on section order and decorum. On the English version, that's page 43 to 44, Mr. Tucker. And it's a short section. Any comments on that? I'll look for a raised hand in the participant section. Yes, Mr. Broussard? I'm breaking my own rules. You gotta. I keep calling on you guys when I see your hands, but. Okay. Oh, it's good. Good. Everyone's good with this section. Perfect. Voting. Next section. Ms. Blaney, is that an okay, or you're raising your hand?
I'm raising my hand,
perfect.
not well, but in paragraph 2 in the second line, line 14 on page 45, it says likely requires amending. Amendments, I just think makes more sense than amending to sections 48 and 49. That's
What line did you say, since you're referring to the English version?
It's on page 45. It's line 14.
14.
So
okay,
likely requires amendments to section.
Yeah. Okay. Andre, you got that? Yeah. All right. So voting is good. I don't see any other hands raised. Question period.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I just did raise my hand.
Yes,
so
you did.
this would continue. This would continue from page 44, line 26 to page 46. One of the things that we heard from Mr. de Clercy's testimony is that, and it's a pretty compelling quote, that one of the challenges in the move to a virtual assembly is to ensure that e-deliberation is more than just an episodic, half-hearted online opinion poll. And I thought that was a pretty compelling quote that I'd like to see inserted somewhere in that section between lines 26 on page 44 and page 46 of line 6. And if that can be inserted in there, I think it was as I said, I think it was a very compelling statement that he made.
Could you repeat that statement again?
Sure, I will. Yes, and it was Mr. de Clercy, to be clear, who said that one of the challenges in the move to virtual assembly is to ensure that e-deliberation is more than just an episodic, half-hearted online opinion poll.
Okay.
I just,
I would hope that stands for everything, even our regular debates in the House in person as well.
And that's why I thought it was compelling, and that it needed to be inserted in this report, because it was probably one of the lines of the studies that we heard. Thank you.
Okay, everyone's okay with that section? I had to hold back about my opinions of some of the debate that I've heard in person at times in the House. Anyways, at times it's very enlightening, and other times not so much. But okay, so voting is good. Question period. Ms. Blaney.
So the second paragraph, it's just on line 20 on the good unedited, sorry, not track change one. It's in person is in that line 20 on page 46. It just should have a hyphen between in and person.
Andre said he'd add that in. Any other comments on question period? It's a small section. Okay. The block is good. The Liberals. Okay. Seeing as there's no hands raised, I'll move on to Section B, future work for the committee on developing procedures and practices. Mr. Broussard.
Thank you. And first, let me start by apologizing. I may have said Dr. DeClercy, identified Dr. DeClercy as a he, and I apologize for that. But I do, on page 47, again, another compelling line that I thought that she came up with that I think needs to be included. And that is to add that Dr. DeClercy's evidence about avoiding a period of crisis becoming an accidental gateway to a permanent method of virtual assembly. And, you know, again, I think it speaks to the fact that, you know, we're looking at, you know, this in the context of an emergency trigger or an emergency situation where we would move to a virtual assembly. And I thought this line was very compelling as well. So if we can include her comments in somewhere in this section, I would appreciate that as well, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Is everyone good with that? Any other additions to this section? Future work of the committee? Seeing as there's no hands up, we will move on to the next section. Oh, sorry, we're at the end. It was looking like we're almost there. Okay, we're at the end, so we have half an hour to go through the recommendations.
Madam Chair?
Yes?
It's taken us 2.5 hours to get to this point. I think we're at a point right now where we need to start talking about what Mr. Richards brought up at the beginning of our meeting, and that is, I don't, you know, I'm hopeful, but I don't see us getting through the recommendations within the time allotted to us now, 28 minutes. Can we talk about the dissenting report and translation, the ability to get this report in front of committee by or in front of or to table the report by Friday? I think it's an important time to have this conversation.
Sure. I think that's not a bad idea, but I think we can make it quick because maybe I can, from what you have submitted so far, it looks like there's 2 recommendations from the Conservatives, 15 or more from the Liberals, and a similar number from the NDP and the Bloc as well. A lot of the recommendations, as I'm looking through them in the different sections, are lining up. I think some need some discussion, I'm sure, but what I'm trying to say is maybe I can pose this question to the different parties and whether you envision many changes to be made to this recommendation portion, because if you don't envision hardly any changes or you're just amalgamating certain recommendations, then really essentially this version of the report doesn't change at all, even if we do go into having to sit for 1 additional hour tomorrow or 2. I don't see how it really changes the essence of this report or the recommendations that the parties have put forward. But any discussion on that? That's just my I think Ms. Blaney, Mr. Richards, you have a discussion point on that? Ms. Blaney, it seems like you might want to say something. Do you think you envision maybe perhaps adding more recommendations or the report looking a lot different than what it does between today and tomorrow?
Okay, so from what I understand, from what Mr. Richards and now what Mr. Broussard is saying is really about our ability to do our reports and the timeline for that. And so I do feel that needs to be answered today because it will have a bearing. There are some recommendations that I have some serious concerns with. Until I know the debate, the discussion that happens in this committee, it's hard for me to say what the final report for me will look like. So that it's a timeline issue and it's an important one also for my team.
Okay, thank you for that. So Mr. Richards and then Madam Normandin.
My thoughts are very similar to Ms. Mulaney's on this topic. I mean, I think it's unrealistic to imagine in the next 25 minutes, I guess it is, that we will go through this volume of recommendations. I mean, there is certainly going to be some discussion. Without doubt, there'll be some suggestion of changes. What that will look like, we won't know until we get into the discussion. But I cannot imagine that we would not be requiring the meeting tomorrow. And so I, like Ms. Blaney, would feel that until we sort of see what those discussions look like, see where things land in the end, it is very hard to sort of settle on a final version of a draft report. I just think it's entirely unrealistic to expect the opposition parties or potentially the government, I suppose, it could provide a dissenting report as well in the minority situation we're in. To draft a report that we don't know what the discussions will look like, we don't know what the final recommendations will be, and we won't know that until tomorrow afternoon. So I just don't think it's realistic to expect us to have that in by the end of the day. We could be still meeting at that point, potentially. Okay. I really do think that there needs to be some extra time provided. Certainly at the very minimum would be the
here
I would suggest possibly the end of the day the next day would be better. I just really don't see how we don't provide extra time. I think would be very unfair and unrealistic to expect that.
Okay, and you've put forward a proposal. We'll just hear from Madam Normandin, and then the clerk can let us know how much leeway he thinks we have in terms of interpretation and being able to prepare the final version. Madame Normandin.
Juste pour vous donner un topo de nous.
Ms. Normandin, just to let you know where we're at, if every recommendation we've made is in the final report, we won't have to write a complementary report. But if some recommendations are different, then I might have a small report to add, but it won't be much. For us, it's mostly turning on translation and linguistic rights or language rights, making sure every angle is covered.
For letting us know that. Justin?
Yes, Lo.
How much leeway do we have in terms of being able to produce for at the end of day on the 15th?
Well, I guess a couple points first. The first specific point that Mr. Richards raised at the beginning of the meeting with respect to dissenting opinions and the deadline, I did check back with parliamentary publications, and they did indicate that for additional leeway until Thursday, May 14th at 12 noon in terms of some additional time, especially seeing as the committee may need to meet tomorrow afternoon as well. So that's what they came back to me with in terms of additional time to have dissenting opinions put in. On the broader issue of the other kind of production milestones that would need to fall into place in order to be able to have the report presented by Friday, in reality, the best answer I can give is it depends how much additional material or additional work the committee ultimately chooses to make to the draft that they saw today. The more work that's required in order to make the modifications to the draft report will obviously take more translation time as well as additional production time from parliamentary publications.
Okay. All right. That's the additional time that's provided. Oh, Mr. Richards, yes.
I had a question.
I thought your hand up was up from before.
No. So, I mean, that still is a fairly tight timeline, and I respect that we're dealing with what we're dealing with now. There are other ways we can get around that as a committee. Certainly, there could be an interim report provided that says we need an extra 2 days. So there are ways around it. However, if we're still seeking to try to do that in that time, what I might suggest is, could we allow the parties to have till noon on Thursday to provide their copy in at least one language, and then follow that by the end of the day with translated version. That would, because otherwise we're.
I couldn't hear the bottom, the second half of what you had just said.
give parties until at least noon on Thursday to provide it in one language, and then our translated version could follow by the end of the day. That way, at least there's, the whoever's working on the production would have some sense of the length and content, and that would allow them to get started on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would give us a bit more leeway, because if you're expecting it translated by noon, that doesn't give us a lot of time to produce a report and do that as well. And whereas if we have the full day, to provide that second language.
Justin? Maybe we can hear from Ms. Blaney quickly before you answer, because there might be something new raised. Ms. Blaney?
Nothing new raised, just really understanding the translation of the document is the biggest barrier for us as well.
Okay. Justin?
So I've been going back and forth with parliamentary publications, and I think ideally if they got something in both languages by midday on the 14th, that would help them out as much as possible. However, if we kind of were to say till the end of the day on Thursday, that they're indicating that should also be workable. So whatever you're able to get in, if it's in the one language by say noon, and then follow that up a few hours later with the translated version by 5 p.m. on May 14th, parliamentary publications seem to indicate to me that that is feasible for them on the issue of the dissenting opinions.
Okay. So I think we've given, I think this answer really does, it should solve the problem. I understand that we're on a tight deadline, but it gives you that extra day, given that we're having that one extra meeting. So you're essentially in the same spot you would have been in had you had to submit it tomorrow. Okay, so does that resolve the issue? And maybe we should just going to have one sidebar before we move forward with the recommendations. Andre, question for you. Just thinking, we were chatting about the fact that there's been a lot of additions added to the text of this report as it stands. And in terms of you being able to get that done, how long would you require? And then I guess the committee needs to decide whether they're comfortable with, if it's not all completed and translated for us to view for tomorrow, then whether the committee members are comfortable with leaving it in your hands, so that trusting that you will get reflect their comments and feedback here today accurately.
It seems to me unlikely to be able to have. Okay, let me restart. I will certainly get the changes done in English before I go to sleep, which may end up being later than I thought I would be going to sleep. But to have the translation come back, I would think would be unlikely by 3. Although they have been very quick, so it is possible. It is possible. I could see it being about 2 pages worth of additional material. So it is, for meeting at 3, it's possible, but I couldn't possibly speak for translation on that, but I'll do my half of that work as fast as I can.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I guess we're going to have to keep our fingers crossed, and I'm hoping that the committee will give. In the past, having worked with you in the previous parliament, you really have never let us down, and your corrections and your additions usually always reflect what the members had intended. So I think we have a lot of faith. I have a lot of faith in you being able to do that accurately and us not having many corrections to make of those. Since we have, I do think we should use all of our time. The questions have been answered. The dissenting or supplementary opinions have to be in by 12 in one language, and then by end of day at 5 p.m. end of business day, 5 p.m. on Thursday, the 14th, in the translated version. Yes, Mr. Richards.
Okay, Madam Chair, I think I'd understood our clerk's comments slightly differently.
You can have them both in by 5 if that makes it better.
How I took it was that he was saying, ideally, we get a first version in one language by noon, and I can commit that we will certainly endeavor to do that. And if it's 1 o'clock, we'll do it. Like whenever we have it in one version, in one language, we'll get it to you. If it's before noon, but my take was that what I thought I heard was that if it was by 5 o'clock, we would be okay. But we are committing, and I don't see any issue with getting it earlier than 5 o'clock in at least one language. So that was
no. It was translated into French and English by 5. On the 14th.
Sure, and I understood that, but my understanding was that it was more of a preference that the first language be received by noon if possible, not that it was absolutely critical. And I don't anticipate it taking until 5 o'clock to get the first language, but if it was to go past noon, it was 1 o'clock or something, I didn't take that as the comments I heard. I didn't take that.
Yeah, I think there's leeway there in terms of when you submit your first language, but we need the both translated versions by 5 on the 14th.
Understood.
Yeah.
So that's understood, and I got that. That's how I took it as well.
Justin, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would simply echo what you've said. By 5 p.m. on May the 14th, Thursday the May 14th, in both official languages.
And there's leeway in between the first language whenever you could get that. But I'm assuming it would be quite early because you would need to give translators time to translate it and have it ready for 5. So thank you. Thanks to everyone in the committee in resolving that. And so we're going to jump to the first section. I'm hoping that maybe we can get through 1 or 2 sections of the recommendations. So starting with the first section of recommendations. Okay, so this is after the discussion section, and raise your hands if you have any ideas. We've got a recommendation. First recommendation is Liberal 1. We should establish an alternative set of standing orders to be used in extraordinary circumstances to enable a fully functioning virtual parliament. Note, this recommendation was slotted by the analyst in 2 possible places in the report. So block number 10 is similar to that in a way as well, that the House permanently amended standing orders to include a section authorizing the implementation of a virtual parliament. Okay, so there's a slight difference, I guess. The rest of it is pretty much the same. And NDP 2 is similar as well. So NDP 2, Block 10, and Liberal 1, I think they're all trying to get at the same idea. Mr. Richards, do you have a proposal? You have your hand up, and then Mr. Turnbull.
I think your indication that I've just received is that because there's sort of 3 that have some similarities, we'll sort of discuss them as a bit of a group, and I think that does make some sense because you obviously I don't think you want to adopt 3 recommendations that are similar in what they're stating. So I don't disagree. And my comments on all 3 would be similar. Other than on the NDP 2, I would maybe have a suggestion on a portion of it that we could work with. But my feeling on all 3 is that we're sort of taking. I think we're taking this past kind of what our expectation was as a committee and what our mandate was as a committee to some degree with those recommendations. What we were mandated to do was to look at this current situation and how we would proceed with sittings, or in what way we might proceed with sittings during the current situation. And so I think these recommendations certainly go far beyond that. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting we wouldn't want to look at that at some point as a committee, but I think that this report isn't the spot for that. The spot for that would be if the committee was to choose to look at recommendations going forward for future circumstances like this and what we might do. And I don't think that's where we are right now. I think we would, if we were wanting to go there, what we should be doing is looking at that outside of the context of the current situation, when we've had a chance to reflect upon how how this situation played out, reflect upon the actions we took, reflect upon the methods we used, and then bring forward something that would be suggestions on what might be done for future circumstances. It's generally not typical that during the middle of a crisis you sort of say, here's what we would do in the next crisis. You look at dealing with the crisis, and then after the crisis is done, you review what occurred and figure out what you would do differently or the same or change about it for the next circumstance. So I would suggest these three fit more in that category, and I would not be supportive. I would say, though, however, when it comes to NDP 2, I think there is a portion of that is useful, and I would say that I would pull out the part about emergency situations and the part that indicates that that modified standing orders should only come into force at the agreement of all recognized parties. So I would, be supportive of that specific portion of it being a recommendation. Just that we would only be modified standing orders that would only come into place if there was agreement from all the recognized parties. So that's my comments on the three and a suggestion on the NDP 2, and we'll look forward to a discussion from others.
Okay, seeing as all these recommendations in the whole report is before the committee, and so every member's feedback is valuable. What I would suggest, though, that if you don't, this is just from experience, if you don't fathom that you're going to vote for that recommendation and like in any way imaginable, then I would just hope that this is a good faith effort, that we're going to try to get somewhere where we hopefully can have consensus on a recommendation. If we adopt things that, is agreeable to everyone, then hopefully I will be able to see that, we'll all be in agreement if we spend a long time on something, and then we'll vote in favor of it as well. If not, then it ends up spending a lot of time on something that from the get-go that you may not be you're never going to be agreeable to. So let's try to I'm just requesting that every member put a good faith effort forward in making their suggestions for these revisions, so that you're making them in order to be able to vote in favor of them, if that's understandable. Yes, Mr. Richards?
Point of order, Madam Chair. I'm not certain if that was directed at myself, because I was the only one who's made any comments at this point. I'm not sure where your questioning of my motives comes from. I was simply indicating my thoughts on the recommendations. I don't believe that someone disagreeing with a recommendation is something that should be silenced. I was giving my opinion, and I expressed why I had that opinion, and in fact actually offered a constructive suggestion on how we could utilize one portion of the recommendations. I hope that wasn't your intention, was to silence someone's that is a legitimate part of the process that we're going through, and it's important to express why.
I think it was constructive, but as I'm seeing hands go up, I'm just trying to figure out how we're going to get through this. And I think ideally we should maybe have a brief time for some suggestions in order to improve some of the recommendations, but ultimately get to a vote on each recommendations in order to move through them. And just in my experience as a member of this committee and other committees, I'm just hoping that all members are going to put forward good faith efforts to improve recommendations so that they're in a state that they would like to see them in so that they can adopt them. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think all members should be doing that. Yes, Mr. Richards.
Well, on that point of order, I mean, nobody here is suggesting that we wouldn't try to get through the report, but frankly, to suggest that MPs have no right to disagree with a recommendation, they should only simply seek to adopt them. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, but that's quite an unacceptable comment for a chair to make. I hope that you'll reflect upon that.
Sure, I will, but I've had some experience, and I'm just speaking from that experience, and I'm wanting to just make some suggestions off the cuff before we enter into this process for everybody for the recommendations, because I think this is the part that we're going to all have to do some brainstorming and some negotiations. And so as I give guidelines oftentimes before we begin any meeting, and every single meeting I have given some guidelines before we enter into a different phase of the process. This process is going to be a little bit different than the process we've been going through so far in terms of going through the text of the report. So I'm just going to continue to hear from everybody on this issue, but eventually when I've heard one point of, I don't want the point of view to be repeated either. I think at that point I will just call a vote on the recommendation, and that's how we'll be able to effectively get through it.
I didn't see it as democratic. Nobody here is trying to hold anything up. And I think for you to suggest that people haven't got a right to express their opinion is not a very good start here. I certainly hope that.
I'm saying I'm going to hear from everyone until the point of repetition. And so that is what I'm saying. So next we will hear from Madame Normandin.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I think that overall, there's a consensus that's coming out about the three proposals, that there be a parallel procedure and standing order, but with the NDP proposal, if there was a vote, seems to me it should be split in two. There's the procedure part, and there's a mechanism for applying it to start the emergency procedure. And I think each party could have a veto. Either we could never use it, or we could never depart from it the moment there's a virtual parliament. So if we had to vote for it, I'd like this to be split in two, please.
Yeah, I think that's in reference to the NDP too.
Well, I don't have opinion on if it should be split or not, because I don't think we've sort of come to a core motion. I have concerns about splitting it. For me, the whole factor in this is right now, as we have moved through COVID-19, we've had a lot of party collaboration, and I think regardless of if we're in a majority or a minority parliament, making sure that all parties have a voice is really important. My concern would be if we took it out of this recommendation, we would lose that. The other part that I just want to say, based on some of the comments made earlier, is none of these recommendations, in my opinion, identify what the standing orders should be. It's just setting up something specifically to address this type of issue. And I think that is, in fact, part of the reason that we were sent to do this work, is to create a bit of a framework for us to move forward. So that's all I have to add right now.
Okay, no, good points. Mr. Turnbull?
I just wanted to make some constructive comments. It seems to me that Liberal 1, the Bloc 10, and the 2 NDP recommendations are quite compatible in my mind. In particular, Lib 1, BQ 10, and NDP 2, I think are almost identical. There's some slight differences, of course. And then NDP 1 really, to me, in my mind, actually speaks to almost the process for creating a list and presenting a list of areas of the standing orders that could be or need to be modified in a situation like we're in. And I think that's a good addition. And it seems like it could be rolled into, almost one recommendation with a subpoint about process. The other thing I would say from my perspective is that the Conservatives' recommendation, although it seems to be more limited in scope in terms of only applying to, I think, standing committees, is still, could be couched within a broader recommendation that represents, it looks like anyways, the majority of the committee members. So, to say something more specific about standing committees and having them be able to exercise all of their ordinary powers, I think is still a very good recommendation that I would certainly support. I think it's just that the will of the committee is a bit broader and is pointing to the fact that we should have an alternative set of standing orders in times of these extraordinary circumstances.
Mr. Broussard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, I think I do agree with Mr. Turnbull in the sense that, in the scope or context of what we're dealing with under the current crisis, that should be in any of the recommendations that we put forward should be the context by which we discuss this. If there are, for example, changes to the standing orders that need to be looked at in the event of any future circumstance, then we can do that at a later time, and we don't have to make those recommendations now and in what context of those standing orders. The other thing I frankly have a concern about is some of the recommendations that I look at, Madam Chair, they're very they're not, like for example, Liberal 1. If you look at alternative set of standing orders to be used in extraordinary circumstances, I think we've heard clearly throughout the course of this study that we are currently in an extraordinary circumstance. But what would trigger a movement to a virtual parliament, a hybrid parliament, or whatever you want to call it, at a later date? And who defines that? Who determines what that extraordinary circumstance might be? Some of these recommendations that are here are very broad in nature, and I don't know whether we want to whether we want to get down to be more specific. So these are the concerns that I have, because we're going to make a recommendation that under extraordinary circumstances, well, what constitutes an extraordinary circumstance? We know that this current crisis does a flood, does a famine, does a war, those are the things. And even in the scope of what we're discussing right now, I think perhaps this is another example of what could be pushed out to a later date or a later study to find out what those triggers and what those mechanisms are because of the evidence that we heard. So
I think that's a really good point, Mr. Broussard, about what triggers this mechanism. I think that is addressed in one of the other recommendations made by one of the parties. But point well taken. And looking at the clock, since it is 2:03 and this committee room and our support staff need to be helping another committee at this time, we don't have a lot of time. But you know what I will do? I will sit down and maybe with the assistance of the clerk as well, try to group like together a little bit better for the next sitting tomorrow, and maybe even try to have some wordsmithing done. And if you can do the same, all of the members of the committee, if you can work with each other, if you can work across party lines, of course, that is ideal, and try to come up with some compromises or try to make improvements to these recommendations, that would be welcome as well. And we're going to meet back tomorrow at 3:00. So we have some time to do that. And I think it's actually a good idea that we have this extra time now so that we arrive at good recommendations and a concise report at the end. Mr. Duncan, you had your hand up. Do you still want to make a comment, or you want to save it for tomorrow?
I can mostly save it for tomorrow. It was just an effort to try to summarize and get a common ground, but we'll continue that discussion tomorrow, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was thinking. So I'll try to group all of that together. I'll try to assist the committee a little bit more. And then if you can also, take a look from that point of view, we will meet back virtually tomorrow at 3, and hopefully we'll have a final report at that point. Thank you. Thanks for all of your assistance, and thanks for all of your participation. Bye.